physiologically, the front seaters, when the visibility isn't great and they're struggling to see out the window, they'll just naturally start leaning forward and get closer and closer to the HUD type device. And it'll tell you if you're driving your car and you look to the left, steering wheel will go to the left a little bit. Well, if you're leaning forward to squint through the HUD to try to find the target and or see that, you'll move forward, and sure enough, the stick is going forward. And I'm in the Pave Tac pod, and I'm watching the angle of the target do this act, and it got to about like that. And one of the many times the good Lord tapped me on the shoulder and said, Grease, you might want to stop what you're doing and look at something else. And I pulled my head out of the feed bag, and my eyes went to the radar altimeter, and it was swinging through 50 feet. And I looked left at the pilot, and he was in that classic way leaning forward position, squinting. I can't see him squinting because he got visor down, but I know he's squinting through the HUD, trying to find the target, because they want to see the target they're dropping the bomb, and they don't want to trust the Wizzo entirely, because it's kind of their thing if we drop it on the love boat. and I'm like, I forgot his call sign. I says, pull up, and he looked over me, and that's not pulling up. So one of the handful of times in my life where I saved my life and grabbed the airplane with both hands and stuck the stick in my lap and jacked the nose up,
Wow.
and got out of that. But it was understanding that relationship of the target aspect as it changed. That was the clue to me that we weren't at 200 feet anymore. That picture was wrong. That shouldn't look like that, because I'd seen it hundreds of times. So got myself out of a jam for that one.
Greece, welcome to 10% 2. It's great to see you.
Great to be here.
So Greece, I'm going to just hopefully not labor the point, but I wanted to say a couple of things before we get into your story, so to speak. And that is that I'm just really excited to talk to you, and I've been thinking about talking to you for a long time, and I'll explain to you and the audience a couple of reasons for that. It's actually three reasons. The first is that on 10% True, even though I don't really have a focus on any particular aeroplane or any particular Air Force, the reality is that probably 90% of my guests have been at US Air Force or US Navy guys, a small proportion of foreign air forces, but mostly on the US side of things, which means that there's certain platforms that have been very well covered by the channel. So F-15 has been well covered, F-16 has been well covered, various other platforms. F-111 has also been really well covered. So I've had EF-111 in Desert Storm. That was Pyro and Super came and talked to the channel about that. I think that is probably the definitive account of Raven operations in Desert Storm. Some really good information around what the platform was capable of and how it was employed during the war and what their experiences were. I've had Marco McCaffrey come and talk about the E-model flying from Inchaluk in Desert Storm. I also had Brad Inslee, who was the high time F-111 guy, talk about flying the airplane in Southeast Asia. And I've been fortunate enough also to have two guys who flew the airplane for El Dorado Canyon in April of '86 come on the channel and talk about that experience too. But what I've not had so far is anybody who was from the F model community come and talk about flying the airplane in Desert Storm. So in a sense, I think what this conversation is going to do is hopefully sort of round the circle and complete the story. Not to say that it's, the story is complete, because there are lots of other perspectives, and then there are dozens and dozens of other people who I could interview. But in terms of sort of completing those main operations and then having a perspective on those, it does that. So that's the first reason I'm really excited to talk to you. The second reason I'm quite excited to talk to you is because I've actually written about you, which we will get to when we get to part two. So for the audience at home, we're going to do this in two episodes. This is going to be the first one, which, as you can tell from our backgrounds, it is about F-111 and what I've just said. But Greece also flew the Strike Eagle. And I have, if anybody isn't aware of this already, I have written about the Strike Eagle quite a bit. I have a book out at the moment called Be Afraid of the Dark, and part one talks about the Strike Eagle's history from 78 until 2002. And Greece is the subject of, I think, 2 or 3 paragraphs. And so I just want to say hello, Captain Panarisi. That's something I want to say, and that will make sense if you've read the book. If you haven't read the book, buy it, and that will make sense. Or just wait until we do part two with Greece, and he will explain what that's all about.
Did my call sign Mal get into that story?
I think I was told it, but I don't know if it went in.
Yeah.
but you'll have to tell us. So um, and then the third reason is kind of a weird one, really. But when I was 16, that's when Desert Storm was happening. I think I was 16, and this was the pre-internet days. I was at that time buying every book and every article and periodical I could about military aviation and military aerospace, anything about Desert Storm. I was a Hoover sucking it up, and at that point in time, with the way the world worked, that was pretty much the medium. You watched stuff on the news, you saw some clips. Desert Storm was pretty good for. Uh, Interestingly enough, when guys landed, there would be a film crew there, and they would say, "Hey, what happened?" And so you were kind of moving to a point where there was real access to military aerospace or military aviation, but there wasn't that much. And about a year after Desert Storm finished, I was listening to a radio program. I think it was BBC Radio 4, and they had a clip, an audio clip only, but it was from the cockpit of an F-111F going in to hit a target. And it was just astounding. I couldn't believe it because it was the first real insight that I had as a civilian into what being a military aviator and going to war actually meant. Because the clip, and I looked for it, I couldn't find it recently, but the clip, well, you could hear the deedle deedle of the radar warning receiver. You could then hear the tone change, and then you could hear the crew well, I wouldn't say hyperventilating because that suggests panic, but it was, they're breathing heavily, and they're saying chaff, chaff, chaff. And the pitch, the octaves go up, I guess, as the threat gets nearer, and they're evading, and it was just staggering. And I've never forgotten that audio clip. And so now for me, it may have come from your cockpit. I don't even know. But for me now, it's an opportunity to talk to somebody all these years later who went and did that thing, was there at the time. And so for me personally, it's therefore also sort of completing a circle. So those are the three reasons that I've really been looking forward to talking to you. Oh, and you have to remind me, um, you were introduced to me by Star Baby. So
Yeah.
Star Baby, I know he will be listening to this. Star Baby, thanks for the intro. You've got to remind me to get some good Star Baby stories from you, or at least one good Star Baby story from you before we complete episode 2. Okay,
Well,
anyway.
Star Baby is an absolute superstar, so it's going to be hard to find anything derogatory that would be humorous at the same time. But yeah, we'll have to think about that. But yeah,
Okay.
that's how I met Star Baby. We overlapped at Lake and East slightly. I never met him there, but we actually got back together when he was as also a reservist for the ACC commander, and we worked a couple of weapons projects together. I was in the weapons prototyping job there at Eglin, and he needed a program office to do some weapons prototyping. That's how we met the first time.
Okay. Well, remember the channel's 10% true. So the bar for the truth part is low. Uh, okay. Greece, that's thank you for bearing with me while I did that intro. I just thought it was
Yeah.
important that I set the scene from my point of view. As you know from listening to some of these episodes, I don't really talk very much. So from now on, the floor is yours to do the talking. Why don't we start with a quick intro then? Who are you? Where'd you come from? What did you end up doing in your Air Force career and post career?
Yeah, so I go all the way back to where the Panarisis came from. My grandparents fled Italy during Mussolini time frame. Landed in Ellis Island. Somewhere in my memorabilia, I have actually an image of where they signed into Ellis Island in New York, and that's kind of a big, family history thing. They eventually found their way to Chicago. So my dad grew up in Chicago, so that's where I came around. Um, Moved around the Chicago area my whole high school career, and ended up going to the Air Force Academy. It was about my only choice. Parents didn't have enough money to send me to college. I had applied to a couple of scholarship opportunities, got awarded those, but they wouldn't pay for everything. So Air Force Academy pays for everything. So that's where I got into the Air Force side. The very interesting thing was I'd never been on an airplane before in my life. So I'm sitting in the airplane in Chicago O'Hare Airport, and just before break release, and like yesterday, I remember this little scene in my head going, "Man, I hope this is fun because I'm about to do it for a living." So got the Air Force Academy, did 4 years of that, got a mechanical engineering degree, ended up in what was then called Specialized Undergrad Navigator Training at Mather. I was towards the end of that program. It moved to Randolph shortly after I was there. You said you talked to Super in the EF-111. Was it Super Dave Harris?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a classmate of mine at SUNT.
Okay.
Yeah, lived right down the street from me. Um, when he retired, he actually had a retirement ceremony here, and his daughters came with him. And I walked to his 20-something-year-old daughter and said, "Last time I saw you, you were in diapers, and I was holding you at Mayfair." So yeah, Super Dave and I go all the way back to our entry into the Air Force. But Silent Night at Mayfair, got F-111s at Lake and Heath. I was thrilled about that. I wanted to go overseas. Preferred an English-speaking country. I did take German in high school, but I didn't want to have to learn another language to live there. But showed up at Lake and Heath, late '80s, and in the 492nd Squadron. Um, that's how I got to Lake and Heath. That's kind of the short story there.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the flying part then. So you knew you wanted to fly. You hadn't flown before. Did you did you look to go pilot, or did you not have the choice of doing that? Did you try pilot and it didn't work out? How did you end up with in the navigated track?
Yeah, so one of the first of many tragedies in the Panarisi career. I went to my junior year at the academy. They put you in the there's some courses you can take that sort of introduce you to flying. So I took the soaring program, the gliders, absolutely loved it. Just had a blast. Got to go to the max altitude you can go in a glider without oxygen and all that. It was a great time. And then they have a filtering program where you fly a modified Cessna 172. We called it T-41 back then. At the Air Force Academy, field elevation is relatively high, around 7,000 feet or so. So regular Cessna 172 would struggle up there. So we modified the 172, put a six-cylinder engine in it, and used that as our filtering airplane. Did great in that. So I got qualified to go to pilot training through that program. About a third of the folks that go through the academy lose their 20/20 vision while they're there. It's just between the years of 18 and 20, 22. That's kind of when your eyes do their last big change. So a lot of folks go there thinking they're going to pilot training, but in the end can't because their vision doesn't get them there. And the acceptance in the pilot training with a vision issue, it literally is indexed by the number of pilots they need. So if they need lots of pilots, if the personnel is like, I can't believe they call it the inventory. So when the inventory is low, they'll write waivers out to 2030, 2035, maybe, vision measurement, as long as you're correctable to 2020. But when the inventory is fine, if you're not 2020, you're not going. I was there at a time when the inventory was low, so they were writing waivers. But I didn't need it. I was 2015 easily. So my eyeballs hang on, went off to pilot training and got creamed in formation flying.
Really?
Yeah, just could not do the formation flying act. So after multiple reattempts and multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment, the Air Force said, Greece. I was in Greece back then, but they said you might have a better shot at completing a training program if you went off into navigator training. So they wrote me out of the pilot business and put me into at Mather, and from a personal standpoint that was brutal.
Yeah.
One of the many shaping events in my life, but I came out of that just fine. I was top of my class at Mather, and got my second choice. My first choice was actually F4s, but at the time, the course you went into after Mather was kind of aligned with when the next training opportunity was.
Mhm.
And so the next F4 course wouldn't have been for 6 months later. And so nobody in my class got an F4. Everybody got F-111s or some other heavy.
I'd like to ask a question, Grease, if I may, which is jumping a long way ahead in terms of your timeline. And so I don't want to go down that rabbit warren too much, and I also don't want to sound disrespectful. I can imagine that Wizzos who gets asked this question, might find it a little bit annoying or irritating, and I don't mean it to come across that way. But given you went pilot pipeline and then retract to nav, I was curious. So 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 as you were flying the F-111, as you went through your career, you've got a stick, you've got a throttle, you're sitting at the front. Did you did you ponder? Were there times where you thought, we'd be cool to be sitting in the left hand seat? or were you comfortable being in the right hand seat? Had you sort of accepted where you were and what you were doing and what your purpose was?
I think it was a little bit of both. If you didn't accept it, you were frustrated forever. And I knew a few guys in that position, and they didn't, they made it through their commitment, and that was it. I learned to accept it. The good news was I had at that time, by the time I got to the F-111, I had probably almost 200 hours of flying time, um, including training. I had acquired a commercial pilot's license while I was in training for the F-111 at Canon. It's a 1 year program, so I had plenty of time on the weekends to go flying. So I completed all that training. So I felt myself very capable, and I used that as there's a handful of war stories out there where the backseater or right seater brought the airplane home and saved the day. So I kept myself abreast of the flying mission that way,
Hmm.
and say, hey, this is my lot, and I can be frustrated and pissed about it, or I can make the best of it. I eventually came around to making the best of it, and that worked out.
Okay, so tell us then about the F-111F. As I said at the beginning, we've had all these guests on. We've gone through. I think FB111. I need to find somebody so we can cover that from a SAC point of view. But we have some idea. Brad gave I think, a good description of the differences between the various variants. I guess the D model is the one that um, probably could warrant another episode if I could find somebody who flew the D model. But can you tell us a little bit about the F-111F as it was when you arrived to the aeroplane? Then what was special about it, and what did you find when you started to do your RTU, or you went through the B course to learn how to fly it?
Yeah, so the F was based on the D. We skipped a generation on the E, let the lessons of the D kind of get relearned, and the D was sometimes called the digital F-111. It was the first one that had a bunch of more computerized kind of attributes about it. And I trained in the D at Canon. So going to the F, the architecture was the same electronically. Some of the displays were different. A couple of the components in the D were changed out. If I remember right, the D had what we would call a green screen on both the left and the right seat for a display. The E and the F went back to the A model hooded screen for the right seater. So we would call it sticking your face in the feed bag when you were looking into the radar or into the IR display. But the rest of the mechanicals were identical. The engines were slightly different. The TF3100, I think, is the designation of the motor. It had been tweaked. Every model of the airplane had a slightly different variant of the motor. F model had the highest thrust, and it was advertised at 25,000 pounds of thrust and burner. And there was a definite difference between the D and the F when you flew the airplane. The extra thrust was very noticeable. But of course, the big difference that everybody pays attention to is the Pave Tac pod. So the weapons bay and the F-111 has had many things in it over its lifetime, but the Pave Tac pod was what made the F model unique. Only in the F model, uh, a derivative of the F4's Pave Penny pod that was an external pod, but in the F model 11, it was actually on this rotating mechanism, this big carousel. So when we quote put the pod out, as we would call it was opening the weapons bay doors. It would rotate on a mechanical device, and the weapons bay doors would close back on it. And then this giant ball was sticking out on the bottom of the airplane. Pretty draggy. You could definitely hear it when it was out. But it was a very, very large infrared laser targeting ball. So at the time, a very good resolution, a very good picture, and absolutely fantastic for use in dry conditions. So since you were changing airplanes, nobody came from the F model when they got to overseas because there was the only place we had was at Lakenheath. So Lakenheath base had four squadrons in it, labeled the 492nd through the 495th, and the 495th was the retraining squadron. So any airplane you came from in the F, either you came straight out of UNT or you were coming from a different airplane like the F4 or something else, you went to the 495th to be converted into the F model F-111. And of course, that was the B course for me. It was my first airplane. So it was, well, they didn't call it B. Canon was the B course. So it was a conversion course at Lakenheath. But it was relatively long because it was my first assignment. It's probably 4 or 5 months. But they added all the missions, so you got a taste of all the aircraft missions in the conversion training, and you the culminated with the check ride, and you spent about a week in the vault, with all the intelligence things, and then you spent a few hours in front of the evaluators playing stump the dummy before you went to the fighter to what they call the fighter squadron. So it was during that phase I earned the call sign Greece. Uh, the way Lake and Heath trained, I'm sure folks have told you, it was a state of constant exercises because we were evaluated by three different entities. Uh, Tactical Air Command was still a thing back in the day. Whatever organization that ran the European Air Forces, I don't think it was called USAFE all the way back then, but it became USAFE in the end, United States Air Forces Europe, and we were part of NATO. We were a dedicated NATO squadron, so we had NATO TAC evals, USAFE IG inspections, and tactical air command inspections. So we were just in this constant mode of exercising and evaluations. And the way they ran Lake and Heath was as soon as you were deemed safe enough to be part of a combat mission, they would pair you with an instructor in an ops squadron if the balloon went up. So they would exercise that way. So probably 6 to 8 weeks after arriving at Lake and Heath, I was deemed safe enough, and they kicked off an exercise. And it's the classic train how you're going to fight. So if there was going to be a war going off, they would shut down the 495th Training Squadron, flush all the instructors back to one of the other squadrons to be combat aviators. And then if a student was good enough, they would be flushed to a squadron as well, but they'd be paired with an instructor. So you would be paired with a regular crewman. So exercise got kicked off. I was flushed out of 95th. I was sent to the 92nd. That was going to be my follow-on squadron anyways. And if you've been around the F-111 community, you probably heard the name Moses Malone. He was the ops officer on the 482nd at the time, and he opened up the exercises like day one of combat. And there's an American drama series called Hill Street Blues, kind of cops and robbers kind of thing. And he used that kind of genre to open up the wars. And so all the planning was done over the weekend. So Monday morning was the first combat mission. The mission planning cells worked 24/7 from Friday through over the weekend to get all the first wave of airplanes missions planned and authored and deconflicted. And so you showed up when you were called and handed a complete mission package that you were going to execute, sight unseen. In training, you planned your own mission, so you were very familiar with what you were going to do, how you were going to do it. But in the first combat mission, somebody in the mission planning cell did the planning for you and handed you a folder with all the mission materials in it. And so he would hand them out Hill Street Blues style. He would call up the crew and give them their package. And my name, he had it on a big overhead of who's next. And my name came up, and I was crewed with one of his instructors. He goes, Buckin, Panarisi, who the fuck is that? And
That's me, sir, Lieutenant Panarisi.
where the hell did you come from?
Sir, I came from the 495th.
He goes, oh, that's brilliant. Another one of those. He goes, another freaking new guy. So he goes, what's your call sign?
Sir, they call me Madman.
Not anymore. We're going to call you Grease. And I went,
That's not sure I like that, sir.
he goes, perfect. That was it. Couldn't shake that one off. So I flew the first set of exercises there, got out of the training squadron into the 92nd, and I was in the 92nd basically in an upgrade training mode your entire first year because you have to learn every weapon. The F-111 dropped every weapon imaginable. You've got pictures of the ballooted Mark 82s behind you, but we had Mark 82 Balutes, Mark 82 Snake Eyes. We had various versions of the Mark 84, various versions of the Blue 109. These special missions that were associated with Lake and Heath. We had Maverick, we had GBU-15, we had even the air-to-air missiles, the AIM-9. I think might have been Papa's early AIM-9s. So understand, all the CBUs, CBU-87, 89, Rockeye, CB-58. It was just a long, long list of weapons, and it was They probably don't have these in Europe, but in America there are aftermarket auto mechanic type shops where you can go get your car work done. And the guy working on your car kind of has stripes on his sleeve. I can do batteries, I can do exhaust, I can do brakes, I can do transmissions. Well, that's what you were doing. You were collecting stripes on your sleeve virtually when you learned a new weapon. Because you had to be able to plan it, do the employment planning, and then actually employ it. So interestingly, laser guided bombs were relatively new at the time. The environment at Lakenheath was very odd. The Pave Tac pod was installed in every airplane, but when I got there, only maybe 20% of the crews were qualified to use it.
Really?
Uh, there was a long training period for that. The big issue was the electronic slaving of the Pave Tac pod towards the target was imperfect. Uh, there's a set of cursors in the radar display, crosshairs, cursors, that sort of thing. And that's where the computer in the airplane believes the target is. It doesn't know anything about the target itself. It just knows where the crosshairs are. And it does the math between altitude, altitude and slant range to figure out the coordinates of the target and does all the calculations based on that. Well, it's supposed to aim the Pave Tac pod to that point if you want to find the target in Pave Tac pod, and the alignment was not great in the airplane. There were some bore sighting things you can do on the ground to try to line it up, but bottom line was that alignment was not very good. So the Wizzo community, the Wizzo Mafia as we called them back then, believed that you had to be an absolute expert in radar image interpretation before we would let you use Pave Tac, because you'd just be wasting your time moving the solder straw around and never find the target. So if you couldn't demonstrate expert cursor placement on a target, they weren't going to waste time on Pave Tac.
Wow.
So there was a whole year of flying the airplane. I never put the pod out.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And that was the big change in the summer of '90 when the new wing commander showed up.
Okay.
He got there and said he was doing his conversion checkout, and his instructor, Wright Cedar, was putting the pod out. Oh, what's that? And he was talking about it and got in conversations. And he eventually learned that very few of our crew were actually fully qualified to use that piece of equipment. And he was like, we are not going to haul around 2,000 pounds of equipment and have only part of the crew able to use it. So I want a training program built that gets everybody trained by August.
Wow.
Okay.
That's very fortuitous.
Very, very fortuitous. And the Wizzo Mafia revolted completely. We are not going to do this. We know what we're doing. And he just kept pressuring the wing chief of tactics. Either you create the program or give me a name of a guy who you think can.
Wow.
So the program was created. I was accelerated into it because I had already been there for a year, so I was learning Pave Tac at that time. And sure enough, by mid-August, probably 85 to 90% of the crews were trained in Pave Tac. It was a cataclysmic shift in the capability of the wing at that point.
Wow.
But I had never dropped a laser guided bomb to that point. There were no training rounds. There were no practice ones. The airplane had a simulator mode, so it believed you dropped a weapon and it would do the countdowns. And other than the thunk, it was real. But by the time August of '90 rolled around, I had dropped a handful of what we called heavyweights, like the weapons that are behind you in the screen. Uh, Hundreds of the 25-pound practice bombs, using Pave Tac as the source of target designation in training, but never had actually had a real laser guided bomb come off the airplane. And in August of '90, the balloon went up. We're going to flush the Air Force out to Saudi Arabia. And that was a big challenge at Lakenheath.
Hey everybody, it's Steve, sponsoring myself. Hey, if you'd like to support 10% True, I'd really appreciate it. You can visit 10percenttrue.com and take a look at the shop page. There's patches and stickers and shirts and things on there. But more importantly, there's my books, including this one, Be Afraid of the Dark, Strike Eagle Story Part 1. That is currently taking pre-orders. It's going to ship in September of 2025. If it's already September 2025, well, that's in the past, then please go and grab a copy. I'll send it out to you ASAP. Many thanks for your support. Greece, before you talk about that, can I just go back a couple of minutes
Sure.
and just delve a bit more into the technicalities, because I don't want to do that when you start talking about going to war. If I can do the technicalities bit, and this is
Yeah.
because I'm a nerd, and most of the audience is nerdy too. So,
I,
um,
I
so
qualify as that.
you do awesome. Okay, so we're in good company.
Yeah, I have 5 master's degrees, so I've been told I'm so well rounded I'm pointless.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to reuse that. Anyone who's highly educated that I ever meet and who thinks, right, that's brilliant. Okay. So tell us, Grace, then just tell me a little bit more. I want to explore a little bit more about being at Lakenheath, the perception of the aeroplane and the mission. So I don't know if you are prepared to talk a bit about the special mission side of things. I'm curious to learn about that. If you are, if you're not, we'll move on. But so you have this aeroplane that has all this inventory in terms of the munitions it can carry, including a good set of precision strike weapons, GBU-15 you mentioned, the LGB series of weapons, and I think eventually it got AGM-130 as well, didn't it? So, and I think also was GBU-24 initially only for the F-111F. So,
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
so it has this precision strike capability. Much of that is tied then to Pave Tac. So you said that only 20% because of the difficulties in doing it. What was the view then of those 80% of Wizzos who were not employing the aeroplane to its fullest potential? And for the pilots too, then, of the wisdom behind not having the kind of thing that is eventually brought in, which is a program to get everybody trained up. Did everybody look at that a bit funny with cocked heads and think, well, this isn't right? Or did everyone think, well, there's enough to be doing with the conventional mission that we don't have to worry about not being able to use that part of the mission capability?
Yeah, so I think when you first got there, it was bizarre to you that there's a chunk of the airplane you couldn't use. But then you got into the training mode, and I almost completely forgot about the other part of the airplane that was very technically difficult, was the train following. So you're learning the train following mission, you're learning the night mission, and we did it in the dark without a FLIR. So flying around in the Scotland Highlands completely in the dark at 200 feet, uh, that that kept your mind plenty occupied. And then you throw in all the other munitions. You kind of got over the have versus the have-nots frustration relatively early. And the simulator, you could do whatever you wanted. So we monkeyed with it in the simulator. So by the time it came time to enter the formal training program, it was, and you were there at least 3 years typically on an assignment. So you were going to get trained sooner or later, just a matter of when. So I think when you first arrive, if you're a brand new guy and you hadn't been trained on it yet, there was some angst initially, but we got over that. But and if you came from another F-111 as a Wizzo, you were already deemed experienced. If you came from the A model or the E model, then yeah, you're put into Pave Tac right away. So,
Okay.
uh, so that wasn't an issue. But you want to get nerdy. What was interesting about Pave Tac, if you were dropping unguided weapons, which all my training to that point was unguided weapons, the bombing triangle is what the airplane's all about. So uh, the computer takes into account airspeed, G, angle of bank, altitude, all that sort of thing. It has a wind model. The mechanical inertial navigation system of the time would calculate wind based on your current drift angle and that sort of thing. So for the airplane to calculate that precise release point for an automated delivery, uh, all depended on the range measurement from the target. So the radar had an air-to-ground ranging mode. It would enter in the bombing solution, but it didn't know where the target was. It just pointed the radar where the cursor was,
Hmm.
with an angle.
Hmm.
So how precisely it measured that angle mattered a lot, and how precisely those radar pulses were coming back and were measured time. So we turn a laser on, and you have a boroscoped infrared camera looking at the target, and all of a sudden the accuracy of your unguided weapons was significantly improved. So we spent a lot of time perfecting that before the laser guided weapons came around. So we were good at that point. And had plenty of things to do between. Oh, and then the other part about you mentioned GB24. it had another nickname, the triple LGB, uh, and I've long since forgotten what the triple L is for, low level laser guided bomb, something like that. But this was Cold War period where speed is life and low altitude is life. So the combination of the way to stay away from SAMs was to fly super low. So flying around 200 feet with a laser guided bomb, finding the target was exceedingly difficult in a infrared targeting pod because the graze angles were so high. But the target didn't have what we call vertical development. It didn't have a flat face, difficult to see. So, and you wanted to stay on terrain following so you could hide. So the pilots had to learn this very dangerous maneuver to employ the GB-24 in the dark, in the weather, at night, not terrain following. So at a calculated position several miles from the target, there's a little pinky switch on the stick called the paddle switch. He would grab that switch, it would disengage the terrain following. He'd jack the nose up some number of degrees, 30, 40 degrees, enter a very steep climb. And this is all in the dark. So there's no outdoor references. And then climb to some pre-calculated altitude, A, to let the Wizzo find the target in the targeting pod, and B, give the weapon a much better trajectory instead of just flying, let it coming off the airplane at 200 feet. Now, 24 is programmed to realize what is my current attitude at release. So if it was a level release low altitude, it would know. And when it came off the airplane after X number of seconds, it would use its control system and try to climb up to get a better look angle for itself. But it would work much better if you gave it that initial altitude. So the left seaters that were going to be Pave Tac and triple LGB qualified had to learn this crazy maneuver at night where we jacked the airplane up, got to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet, literally rolled inverted in the dark, pulled the nose down, let the weapon go and climb attitude, and then get back onto terrain following as the Wizzo guided the weapon. And oh, by the way, he had to turn away from the target at the same time because the Pave Tac pod needed to be visible. The target had to be visible in the field of regard of the Pave Tac pod during that entire maneuver. And he couldn't overbank and come out of the field of regard of the Pave Tac. So it was really complicated. And I think that was a very good decision in the training program to, hey, let's get the left seaters completely comfortable on TF. Let's get them comfortable in the airplane before we start throwing them into the chute of this nighttime maneuver. So employing from low altitude was another big part of the airplane that we all had to get used to. And then, fast forward a little bit, by roughly day 7 of Desert Storm, we completely abandoned. So we did countless hours of terrain following and low altitude hide from the SAMs training. And my first non-low altitude mission, Desert Storm, I was absolutely incredulous. I walked into the planning cell to pick up my mission package, and I'm looking at the materials, and all the numbers are whacked. The release ranges are bizarre. The time of fall is crazy. The angles don't make any sense. The airspeeds are totally foreign to me. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And the guy hands says, dude, you're going in medium. I'm like, no, we're not. And the map they give us has all the threat rings on it. And there's, like half a dozen SA6s right in the target area. And we're going right through the SA6 rings at 25,000 feet. And I was like, we're not doing this, And oh yeah, you are. You and 20 other guys are going to do that.
Wow.
So we actually used that technique in combat a couple of times, and then we were at medium altitude the whole rest of the war.
What did you think then of doing it? Just we'll go to Desert Storm in a second, but I just want to stay just pre-Desert Storm just for the moment with regards to this then. So one of the things that I read recently, there are some guys who are on my Discord who've done a really good job of getting some RAF tactics manuals declassified, and the Tornado GR1 tactics manual talks about, because the Tornado GR1 had the low level. And we'll talk about that again because that will probably play part of the conversation around going in medium altitude, the tornado experiences. But the tactics manual talks about the promulgation of TFR jamming systems by the Soviets that would be placed at key points, entry points into low-level zones and stuff, likely entry points for you guys to come in. Were you expecting to be jammed if we're talking about Cold War threat, talking about going in folder gap type scenario? Were you expecting to be jammed? Were you expecting to be able to fly UOTF profiles unimpeded?
Yeah, we didn't anticipate jamming it at all. We didn't train for it at least.
Okay.
The only thing we trained on and the left seater training was most of the guys flew completely auto TF. There was a way, if you're familiar with instrument flying, there's a landing mode called the ILS, Instrument Landing System. And in most airplanes, you get a set of steering bars and the attitude indicator, horizontal one for up down and a vertical one for left right. And so the terrain following system was programmed to give those identical type steering commands into the attitude indicator for the pilot. So he could basically fly a very, very long ILS if he needed to, if the autopilot wouldn't couple with the terrain following system. So they'd train that, and the display of the terrain following data was in the middle of the cockpit, so it wasn't hooded. So left seaters were trained on interpreting that bizarre display. In the radar display world, there are different types of presentations of the data. That was called an E-scope,
Mhm.
whereas the classical V-shaped cone thing back and forth that you typically see is called a B-scope. Um, and so on the E-scope, that the terrain had this bizarre, if it was flat terrain, it had this bizarre curve to it, because if you think about how the terrain following system worked, um, uh, there were a pair of radars in the nose of the airplane that were dedicated to the terrain following system, independent of the attack radar. And see if I can do it. There we go. Are my hands visible?
They are. Yeah.
So one went up and down, and one went left and right. And that created a three-dimensional set of returns for the computer to calculate the elevation of the train as it undulated up and down. And so if you imagine taking a flashlight directly underneath you and then rotating it outward, the beam gets elongated
Mm.
and becomes elliptical as it goes out. So the distance straight down versus the distance at it, as the angle goes out, that change in distance isn't linear. So the display had this odd, not quite logarithmic sort of pattern to it. And in flat terrain, you can recognize it right away. And then in the hilly terrain, it would change, and the computer put a reference line up, said, here's what we're expecting and all of that. So if there was jamming, there were certain things you could do to the terrain following system and change channels and that sort of thing to make it better, but or change your direction by a little bit. That would difference, but they could fly the raw data a little bit. If there was just intermittent kind of interruptions, they could fly the raw data.
Mm.
Or if it was relatively flat, just fly the radar altimeter. If you were flying over the water, there were no radar returns. So the terrain following system defaulted to just giving you commands off the radar altimeter, which is looking straight down.
Okay.
So
Did you? I think it was Marco McCaffrey when he was talking about the E model, and he was talking about flying TF at night. He was a left seater, and he was. I'm sure he said that there was one time they were flying along, and his wizzo said they were low level, and his wizzo said to him, "Don't turn." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because we're in a canyon, and they
oh
were
yeah.
in the middle of the night." So, did that stuff? You mentioned that the maneuver for the GBU-24 was very dangerous. I mean, all sounds like it was very dangerous. But did that stuff? Was that sort of a really high pucker factor type thing to do? Did you become accustomed to it, acclimated to it? Did it become
Yeah, it
second
was it was
nature?
actually, yeah. So I ended up becoming instructor Wizzo by the time I left Lake and Heath. So that canyon experience was one of the first things we did to the new left seaters. We didn't have FLIRs, and the canopy of the airplane was relatively relatively good visibility from about 3 and 9 o'clock forward. So planning a terrain following mission was an art all in itself to make sure that the airplane was capable of executing the turns you were planning, and you didn't run into a rock while you were doing it. That the airplane, if you had to climb at a certain point in the terrain, that you actually had enough airspeed and power available to make the climb, so you wouldn't top out and not have enough energy to do it. Uh, we planned all the turns at 35, 30 degrees or so. The terrain following system was capable up to 45 degrees, but if you planned it at 45 and it didn't work out and you were trying to skirt them out and you weren't going to make it, so we planned them with some margin. But we would intentionally plan missions straight down the valleys in Scotland on centerline with elevations significantly higher than your airplane on both the left and right side. And the F-111 has a very, very bright rotating beacon on the top and the bottom of the airplane for anti-collision visibility in peacetime. And there's actually a couple comments on the internet somewhere where people are talking about how F-111 was really fast, and it's fast because its rotating beacon will retract if required. Yes, when you turn it off, it does retract. I'm not so sure why, but it didn't do a drag. You're playing with plenty of drag. You moving that little beacon up and down, it isn't going to matter in the grand scheme of things. But it was super bright, and so we would give the pilot either manual steering commands left and right, or just put the airplane on autopilot and just steer the airplane with the radar basically to get us into the canyon. And then we would say, "Hey, Scoop, look over your left shoulder," and they look to their left, and you could just see him freak when the rotating beacon lit up the side of the canyon because they then realized they were flying right next to the rocks. Uh, and the train follow system knew they were there. And if you tried to turn left into them, the stick would bounce, and so it would know. It would let you if you pushed hard enough, but it did tell you, hey, you want to stay straight in this next 10 seconds or whatever. So
Wow.
yeah, it was. I look back now because um, I've had a lot of near life ending events in my 40 years in airplanes. And I look back at Desert Storm and all my previous time in the airplane, and I don't remember having that kind of apprehension.
Hmm.
I think it was either we just kind of got accustomed to it, or we were so busy with the duties of taking care of the airplane that you didn't have brain cells left to be scared. Uh, but the Vietnam experience, taught the crews that it was something to be scared of.
Yeah.
You could very easily lose you in the airplane on the train following system, uh, but when I was in it, it was almost 20 years matured from that point. The bugs had quote been worked out. It was uber reliable. If the two radars had a problem, it sent faults to the computer, and they turned themselves off, and the airplane would climb away. So it was definitely a different experience when I got to the Strike Eagle, when you had a single channel terrain following system versus the dual channel one in the F-111. So there's redundancy in the F-111, but you had the FLIR.
Yeah.
So you could always look out the window, sort of. And then at the very end of my time at Strike Eagle, we had night vision goggles. So you could look out the window for real, and kind of have a backup, but not when it was raining. So the
Handy for
F-111,
Europe.
yes. And so the F-111 was the only airplane that I'm aware of that was ever actually certified for night IFR, or night in the weather terrain following. Um,
Would you could you lower the pod in the F-111 then to act as a sort of FLIR and just have it pointing onto the bore sight, or center line, whatever it's called, the
yep, you could
waterline.
cant it forward, and you could see the train coming.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any kind of display in the Pave Tac pod that gave you an indication where the airplane was flying. So in the heads-up display, the Strike Eagle, you had velocity vector, all that sort of thing. But in the Pave Tac pod, it was purely a weapons display. So uh, it actually did save my life one time. I was flying with a staff guy from one of the numbered air forces. So those poor guys flew occasionally. Their skills did atrophy while they were doing a bunch of paperwork behind the desk all the time and come fly. So I was flying a bombing practice mission in at Wainfleet Range there on the Wash, and I need a piece of paper or something. This will probably work. Yeah. So in the Pave Tac pod, I haven't rehearsed this demonstration, so we'll see if this works. But see if you can see the piece of paper.
I can see the paper.
Uh,
Yeah.
the 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 angle of the image does give you an indication of your altitude. So if it's one of the targets at Wainfleet was literally a shipping container, so a big rectangle box. So if you see the top of the box, you are thousands of feet above the target looking down on it. And if you see the side of the box kind of at an angle like this, you know you're above the target, um, and looking towards face of it. And when you're doing practice bombing, we were doing it 200 feet TFR practicing, and the weather was not great. The visibility wasn't great. And it was an interesting thing in the F-111, the front seater, it wasn't really, it was kind of a HUD, but it was more of a sight in the F-111. And physiologically, the front seaters, when the visibility isn't great and they're struggling to see out the window, they'll just naturally start leaning forward and get closer and closer to the HUD type device. And it'll tell you if you're driving your car and you look to the left, steering wheel will go to the left a little bit. Well, if you're leaning forward to squint through the HUD to try to find the target and or see that, you'll move forward. And sure enough, the stick is going forward. And I'm in the Pave Tac pod, and I'm watching the side. I'm watching the angle of the target do this act, and it got to about like that. And one of the many times, the good Lord tapped me on the shoulder and said, Grease, you might want to stop what you're doing and look at something else. And I pulled my head out of the feed bag, and my eyes went to the radar altimeter, and it was swinging through 50 feet. And I looked left at the pilot, and he was in that classic way leaning forward position, squinting. I can't see him squinting because he got visor down, but I know he's squinting through the HUD, trying to find the target because they want to see the target they're dropping the bomb, and they don't want to trust the Wizzo entirely because it's kind of their thing if we drop it on the love boat. and I'm like I forgot his call sign. I says pull up, and he looked over me, and that's not pulling up. So one of the handful of times in my life where I saved my life and grabbed the airplane with both hands and stuck the stick in my lap and jacked the nose up,
Wow.
and got out of that. But it was understanding that relationship of the target aspect as it changed. That was the clue to me that we weren't at 200 feet anymore. That picture was wrong. That shouldn't look like that because I'd seen it hundreds of times. So got myself out of the jam for that one.
What's the debrief for an event like that then? How does that
It, it
handle? How does that go?
yeah. So the debriefs typically in the fighter business are pretty harsh. They don't pull any punches. They call it like they saw it. And he was an experienced guy, but he was always going to be crewed with an instructor because he was not flying consistently. So that's as the instructor, that was my role to tell him, hey, you know, this is what complacency gets you. This is what inconsistent flying gets you. So you got to get with the schedulers and either get in the sim more, or you got to break away from your desk more often because that could have killed us both.
Hmm.
Um,
Did he accept that? Was that a
100%, 100%. He scared the shit out of himself too. There's no doubt about it. Next thing he knows, the right seater's got the airplane jacked up in the air, and it absolutely got his attention. So yeah, he didn't realize how low he was until we saw the tapes afterwards, and you could just see in the tape review after the flight, he had no clue he was that low.
Wow.
And that was one of the more dangerous things about flying in England because the weather wasn't great, so you get a very foggy horizon. You don't get a nice straight line like you got in Arizona, um, and the visibility. There was some rule on the bombing range, probably had to have visibility around 3 miles or so to be able to do bombing. So that's not great, compared to 20 miles it is out west. So you get sucked into that funnel, and you lose SA on everything else around you. And that was one of the first Strike Eagle lessons put up on the board before every flight by one of the first instructors. Goes, you got to have enough SA to know you've lost SA.
Yeah. Tell me a little about then, sort of culturally. I'm not sure exactly how to word the question, but culturally, sort of, how did you guys feel about the airplane in the aftermath of El Dorado Canyon? So El Dorado Canyon was April of '86. You got there in about '88, '89 by the sounds of it. So 3 or 4 years later. Um, was there some pride in the wing? Did you look at El Dorado Canyon and have a sort of pretty critical assessment of performance? The impact was there. Politically, it did Reagan wanted it to do, but and the crews have performed. I know the crews did a great job. But did you look at the employment of the airplane? I know there was a lot of there was some last minute changes. There was some interference at a sort of higher level as to how the mission was going to be executed and the number of airplanes were going to be on it and the flow and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just curious to know whether when you got there were lessons learned. Was it something that was in the past that nobody talked about, or was it something that was very much in the present and you were shown the tapes and told, okay, this is the good bits and these are the bad bits?
Yeah, I didn't hear much about it when I was there actually. The crew rotation is so frequent at Lake and Heath. I literally didn't know anybody when I got to Lake and Heath. Nobody I ran into had been on that mission.
Okay.
Zero people. There were tapes in the weapons vault. We watched all the tapes and we saw. But if I remember right, there were no laser guided bombs on that mission. It was all unguided. But the crews who were trained in Pave Tac did use Pave Tac to help find the target because, like as I said, it did improve the unguided weapons accuracy. But the airplane, I think, the community in the F-111 at that time was suffering a little bit because the Strike Eagle was emerging. The F-16 do it all, jack of all trades airplane was gaining lots and lots of popularity. The F-4 was gone by that point, or about to be gone by that point. Um, the airplane itself was suffering mechanically because at the time there were half a dozen variants of the airplane flying. We had the A models in Idaho. The B model was discarded by the Navy, so it went away. The C models were flying in Australia. The D models were the only at Cannon. The E model was only at Hayford, and the F model was only at Lake and Heath. So logistically, taking care of the airplane was really, really hard on the Air Force, and they were funneling all the cash to the other airframes. It was playing second fiddle philosophically in the Air Force leadership by this time. I mean, probably the best example of that was the inertial navigation system of the airplane, mechanical. And by the time I got to the airplane, horrifically unreliable. It would take on the order of 20 minutes to align on the ground. That he had plenty of pre-flight to do anyway, so that's first thing he was type in the coordinates, press the align button, you get on with other things. But easily half the missions I flew, if not more, sometime during the flight, the classic caution, master caution, primary flight attitude, primary flight vector, light caution lights would come on, and you look down and the INS is running away at thousands of miles an hour. And there was not a great way to shut it down. And it was had a programming feature where you could stabilize the airplane, fly off the backup indicators, get the airplane level, shut the INS down, turn it back on, let it realign roughly in the air. And then the way to get it to actually align was to feed it target updates in roughly 10-minute increments so that it could the way it determines it has an error is that if it believes it should be here, and then 10 minutes later you tell it it's actually over there, that delta, that change in distance, has velocity associated with it, so it becomes a drift rate in the computer. So I'm drifting 2 miles an hour to the east. We'll do that calculation. I'll apply a 2 mile to an hour west correction in my calculations, and you could feed it these fixes for 15, 20 minutes and bring it back.
Okay.
I think I succeeded in that three times in total. Normally it was a hard failure and it would never come back to life. They didn't have parts. There were no replacement INSs. So the guys in the maintenance shop were literally taking parts out of other failed INSs to create functional INSs. It was, the classical cannibalization strategy to keep the airplane alive. And same with the engines. The F model engines were unique. The D model engines were unique. So you didn't have spare engines. So from a maintenance perspective, the airplane was kind of in decline. The D model had half a dozen systems in it that were turned off and never to be turned back on again. On the picture behind you, there's a big red attachment to the tail. I don't remember the F model actually had the system in it, but all the previous F-111s did. They had an infrared missile warning receiver back there in the tail. By the time I got to the airplane, I had logged them to disconnect because they couldn't keep it working. When we showed up at Taif in Desert Storm or Desert Shield, a C-130 landed, pallets were unloaded, an entire pallet of brand new INSs were pulled out of the back of the C-130. They were in war reserve material storage, not to be taken out except for in times of war. It was war, so they flushed these parts out of the system, and all the F-111s overnight got brand new INSs, and I didn't have a single INS failure in the totality of Desert Storm.
Wow. Wow.
So
Let me ask you one more question, and we'll go to Desert Storm. So can I ask you about the special mission side of things? Did you have a target? Can you say what it was? You had a
yeah,
target, but you couldn't say what it was.
so what we didn't plan it that way.
Okay.
It was an annual certification, just like Star Baby. I employed Star Baby's strategy of getting on the nuke certification board early. I invented it before Star Baby used it. But yeah, so for that mission, just like in a regular mission planning cell environment, you were handed a package and you executed it. You didn't plan it yourself. It was,
Okay.
planned for it, even handed to you. So the certification was all about weapons employment, weapons features, weapons pre-flight, and then slightly different tactical execution where your survivability was a little less important and getting to the target was a little more important. So risk, your risk tolerance was significantly higher. And it was going to be terrain following in the dark with the shields up and the curtains down. Completely, there were actually foil backed curtains on the windscreen or on the canopy, and then shields on the. You're going to button up the airplane and not look out the window.
Yeah.
And the classic. Uh, I think there was some mythology or some urban legend or some 10% truism going on at the time, but there were people who talked about wearing eye patches because if a flash went off near your airplane, you'd have one good eye still. Uh, Nobody I knew actually trained that way, but that was a legend out there. And then the other legend was if there was something you needed to see outside the airplane, you would tell the whiz to look outside, so you preserved the pilot's outside. But did Star Baby give you the ultimate certification story?
No. Well, no, I don't think so. He did the story as you've alluded to, but I don't know if it was the ultimate one.
So this is at least 10% true, if not 12% true. But there was at the time, if I remember what his position was, he was the group commander when I was there. So the group commander is like the ultimate tactician. He's the epitome of the airplane if you're the ops group commander. The wing commander was understood to have been distanced from the airplane enough that they've done some staff tours and some school and things. So they may not be the best tactician in the airplane, didn't maybe not, but the ops group commander, nobody questioned the ops group commander, except maybe the wing chief of tactics. So on those boards, you usually have the wing commander at the board um, asking all the policy questions. Do you have any mental reservations? That sort of thing. The ops group commander would ask the very, very challenging tactical questions, but you wouldn't know what they were ahead of time. All of the other positions on the board, the weapons and tactics guy, the terrain following guy, the policy guy, there was a bank of questions in the vault that everybody wrote down as soon as they got done with the board. This is what they asked me. So you had a big study bank. So there were very few surprises from all the other board members. The EWO has the same questions all the time. Um, so, uh, uh, so this guy was known to be a wild card. He asked different questions all the time. So the urban legend story from this guy was this crew had completely finished their evaluation, and the wing king wasn't there, so he was acting as the wing commander. And so all the questions were complete. They thought they had passed because failing that board is a big deal. That's
Yeah.
a big problem. And so they were, and you're literally, it's 2 hours, and you're no kidding sweating by the time you're done. It's one of those significant emotional events. And so this guy does his last question. He goes, "All right, you guys seem to know your shit. Uh, so you're off on your mission, you're doing your thing, and you're flying along, got the curtains up, shields down, and you're on the windscreen. What are you gonna do?" And the crew look at each other like, I have no clue where I'm going with this one, and they're just totally beside themselves. So the pilot straightens up and goes, "All right, sir. In accordance with our pre-flight strategy, I'll ask the Wizzo to lower his curtain and look outside and see what that's all about." He goes, "Oh, good enough. Good, you do that, and you got two Swedish Drakens right around your wing, and you look back and there's one on your tail." Okay, and they got on the radio and they say, "American capitalist pig, you invaded the sovereign airspace of Sweden. You must leave our airspace. We will shoot you down. What are you going to do?" He goes, "All right, sir. I will pull off the rest of the shields and curtains and do my best avoidance maneuvers, wings back, afterburners on. I'll do all my hayakas and evade and get back on course and continue my mission." He goes, "All right, you do all that shit. You get buttoned up again in here on the windscreen again." He goes, "All right, I'll look again. Same guys, same mission, but now they're locked up on your tail. The radar warning receiver's going bananas. They're locked in your tail, and they say, 'American pig, you will leave our airspace right now, or you'll be shot down. What are you going to do?'" "Well, sir, mission completion is utmost, so I will comply with their instructions and deviate off course, leave their airspace, and find another way to the target." And he slams his hand and goes, "Bullshit." And everybody's like, "Oh no, what's he gonna say?" He goes, "You get," and he was dead serious. He goes, "You get ready, and you tell that son of a bitch you got two live armed nukes on board, and if they doesn't get off your tail, you're gonna drop one right fucking now. They will leave." So that was special mission certification right there in a nutshell.
So you didn't then have a sort of formal part of the SIOP, the single integrated operating plan. They didn't have for you as a crew. You weren't hard crewed and told, "Here's a site in Poland or Czechoslovakia or whatever." So did you think much about the possibility of being sent on a no kidding tactical nuclear mission? Did that cross your
Early
mind?
on, yeah, early on, it was drilled into you. First year, that was all about that. That's all the exercises, all the NATO exercises were all very focused on that. But by the time Desert Storm kicked off, it was secondary mission, back in the back. And everybody realized by the time you got SLBMs, ICBMs, and other ways to send a non-stealthy aluminum airplane overhead a target at 200 feet to go drop a tactical nuke, what's the point? So eventually, I mean, I wasn't in the nuclear planning business, so I don't know all the details, but it fell off the wayside towards the end, and we didn't really give it much thought. But in the end, in the beginning, it was mission one.
Did you think you were going to come back from that? I think it was one of the Jose Jimenez was one of the El Dorado Canyon Raiders that I interviewed, and the other one, he's not publicly given his name, so I won't name him, but I think he was Puffy 12. And I think he said to me that they were going to have 60 seconds of fuel off target, heading west for 60 seconds, and they would flame out. And he thought they would, if they survived the blast, they would be probably walking. They had a list maybe of safe houses or something they could go to or whatever. What was your view on it? Did you think it was a survivable thing? Were you going to be coming home?
No, no, there were lots of uh, uncertainties, I'll call it that way, about how the structure of the airplane was going to handle the shock wave coming across it. There were guys that said, I mean, every crew had their own strategy, but one option was, if we get the TFRs, jack the airplane up, get as high and as fast as you can, so that you have the most time to recover the airplane when the shock wave comes across. It makes the airplane tumble. There were fears that the EMP would wreck all the electronics and fry all the computers.
Hmm.
So nobody really believed it was a survival mission, and we just kind of accepted that because just like the guys in Vietnam learned, you can be shot down in a conventional weapon, in conventional conflict just the same way. So I don't think anybody really gave it much thought. I think people realized that if we're so desperate in a conflict, then we're sending 60s vintage airplanes to go drop tactical weapons. This is going badly.
Okay, Greece, take us back to August 1990 then. So where are you at with your sort of career in the F-111F then? Were you an instructor wizard at that point? What?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. Okay.
Fully qualified, Pave Tac qualified, fully checked out in the airplane, um, and known, I think, regarded as um, one of the more intellectual type crewmates. Really big into planning and tactics and that sort of thing. Less about the bravado and that sort of stuff. Um, got to use my engineering degree and my interest in computers. We had this colossal mission planning tower that was horribly unreliable that I was always glued to trying to make it work. We actually had a guy from Georgia Tech, Doctor. I won't say his name because I don't know if he's up on that, but he was a PhD, young sub 30-year-old who had actually authored the code for this mission planning system, and he was at Lake and Heath working with us on live bug fixes. So this guy could literally write code as you talk to him, and he would reprogram this thing on the fly. He deployed with us.
Really?
He went to Desert Storm with us, set up in the weapon shop, had a cot in the mission planning cell, and basically kept those things running for us for the totality of Desert Storm. So when the balloon went up, as I said, it really created a very unusual atmosphere at Lake and Heath. The decision at the time, you can argue the was this the right decision or not. Either way, you could make pros and cons on both sides. Um, but we would have believed normally that squadron/unit integrity was paramount. So if you're going to deploy a part of the wing, you would deploy an entire squadron intact. And instead, the leadership decided, no, we're going to take the top 4 or 5 crews from each of the 3 squadrons and deploy that package on the initial round. So it became the big A team, B team, Z team environment. There was a lot of animosity. It was a very, very difficult period of weeks when the initial deployment happened because who was going to deploy when, for what reasons. It was really awful because not everybody knew, and so the rumors were flying like crazy. I was lucky. I didn't have to deal with any of it. I was not in the top 10% of experienced air crew in the wing by any stretch of imagination because it was my first assignment. So I knew I wasn't going to go on the first wave. But myself and another guy were sent on the first wave to the planning cell in Riyadh.
Ah, was that
So
the
I left.
TACC?
Yes,
Okay.
it had a different name. I think it was TACC at the time, but it changed its name a couple of times while we were there. But I missed all the fur balls at Lake Heath because in early August I went straight to Riyadh to participate in the planning part of it. So all the who's going to go, who's not going to go, who can go, I missed all that, and I was a little bit bummed because the first wave, the guys were the golden guys, and they were going to get all the accolades. And I want to say it was a dozen airplanes or so in the first wave, um, maybe 24, but it wasn't a complete squadron. And everybody who was quote left behind was now politicking to be on the next wave because we knew there was going to be another wave. Uh, the crewmate and I that were in Riyadh were out of that fight entirely. And then by roughly November, it was clear that we were going to send every airplane that was flyable down to Taif. The entire wing was going to get flushed. They're going to shut down a chain squadron just like we had practiced. If you had a heartbeat and were physically qualified, you were going to go to Taif. And all of the folks that had some issue were going to be the ones manning the planning cells and all the other ancillary missions. So the left seat and I were pulled out of Riyadh, I want to say around November, reintroduced back to the crews in Taif and reintegrated into what became 3 full operational squadrons again. And the deployment strategy, they call it rainbowing. A little bit from blue, a little bit from red, a little bit from yellow. When I first got to Taif, I was put in the red squadron, but as more airplanes showed up, I went back to blue again, where I'd come from, and recruited with a guy I was very familiar with. So uh, right around Thanksgiving time, I'm thinking is when that happened. So we had roughly 2 months of Desert Shield prep time where we flew every imaginable type of mission in training. Another one that was very fortuitous. We didn't think much about what you probably heard referred to as tank blinking at the end of the Desert Storm. It was never a tactic that we had thought about or practiced or had thought, but word came down from the planning cell in Riyadh that everybody's going to go take out the Iraqi army at some point, so get good at it. So we coordinated with the U.S. Army units out that were deploying, and we got comms to some of those guys, and we would do simulated attacks on their vehicles so that we could learn what they look like in infrared environment, what engine running, engine not running, campfire nearby, campfire not nearby, high altitude, low altitude. So we were well prepared for that mission when it came around. The one thing that we were not prepared for, and this was just a logistical decision on the Air Force's side, they never developed a laser guided bomb rack for the airplane. Whereas in the F-16, there was a thing called a TER, triple ejector rack. I'm sure you could carry 3 LGBs on that, the 500-pound version on that rack. At that time, nobody was doing that, but it was physically possible. But that wasn't possible on the F-111. So you had 4 hard points on the wings, carry a 500-pounder there, or a 2,000-pounder there, or a 1,000-pounder one.
But you could carry MERS and TERS.
Yeah,
You just
not
couldn't
with the
carry
laser,
them with the
not
laser.
with the laser guidance kit. They
Okay.
were no I want to say it was called the Brew 58. Don't quote me on the number anymore. That's way back in the 80s. But the what let the airplane carry 6 times 24 500-pounders
Yeah.
was a Brew bomb rack unit that could carry 6 500-pounders, but they were nose to tail. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you put a 2.5 foot long laser seeker on the front of it, it ain't happening.
Yeah.
And the GBU-24 seeker was really big, so you could carry one on the hard point. So we went out tank plinking with 4 500-pounders. Not a terribly impressive loadout,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
had 70-ish airplanes at Taif. During that phase of the war, we would have 2 waves at night, and we only flew at night. I didn't fly any day missions during the war. Uh, and we would probably put on the order of 40 to 50 in the first wave and on the order of 30 in the second wave. So you put 80 airplanes out there with 4 weapons each with fish in a barrel accuracy. You're talking a triple digit number of artillery pieces and tanks that aren't going to survive that night. And we would put a 20 ship over the top of a known this was making kill boxes famous before kill boxes were famous, because we didn't have perfect intel on where the units were deployed. We had gone through all the air defenses, all the airfields, all of the weapon storage areas. So, and the ground invasion was imminent. So all the targeting became take out the Iraqi army and soften it up so the guys have an easier go at it. And keep them occupied so that the whole left hook thing wouldn't be recognized. They wouldn't be able to see that was coming because they were having iron rain down on them, 24/7. So we would put a 20 ship over an area maybe 10 miles by 10 miles wide, just a grid box that Intel would give us. And we had the planning cell created this, we call it the daisy wheel or whatever, all medium altitude, of course. So it was non-challenging in a completely air dominate environment where there were no SAMs anymore. If you flew above 20,000 feet, AAA was less of a worry. The 105 howitzers equivalent that they had was about the only thing that could reach up and get us at that time. So we put a 20 ship over top of a target with varying ingress angles and various time, all of it orchestrated like an unbelievable ballet, all planned out to the second. And with 20 airplanes with 4 weapons each, there's 80 on one Republican Guard unit. Not much of it survived that event, to the point where after the 3rd or 4th day of doing that, the enemy adapts. So they realized that it was cold, it was wintertime, so it was February, March timeframe. So they would initially have their tanks running to stay warm. Well, Helen Keller could find that tank in the targeting pod from 20 miles out. So, and then when the weapon hit it, it would burn for some time. And the Iraqis figured out quickly if they put a tarp over the top of their tank when the after so we they had no warning we were coming. So probably week two of the Desert Storm, we invented the term bomb activated AAA, because we would send a 10 ship or a 20 ship of airplanes into a target area. Initially, it was airfields for the most part, and they wouldn't see us coming because all the early warning radars were gone. The SAMs didn't have didn't have surveillance radars attached to them. So as soon as the first thing blew up on the airfield, they knew there was somebody around, and all the AAA came flying up. And if you were number 10 or 15 back in the train watching all this happen, you'd see you'd see the first explosion, and then just this it's like taking a log and throwing it on the fire, and all the sparks would come up, and you'd see that out in the distance going, we're going to fly into that crap. So being the first guy in the target, just like any other conflict, that was great. Being the last guy was not so good. But tank plinking became the last phase of that whole conflict, and with 4 weapons, that was suboptimal. We could have carried a dozen easily with the right racks. Those racks didn't exist. But that was another contribution of our wing commander. So I was in the planning cell that night when he got a call from Riyadh announcing a new tactic that they wanted to accelerate. They knew that we didn't have a lot of weapons carriage. They knew we had limits on number of sorties and that kind of thing. So the wizards up in Riyadh were trying to figure out a way to make this more effective. And I want to say somebody convinced them the B-52s could carry lots of laser guided bombs, not just 4, but they had no laser. So they dreamed up this tactic where we're going to fly on the wing of a B-52 in the dark at night and do buddy lasing, as we called it, for the B-52 so they could drop lots and lots and lots of weapons. And he exploded on the phone. He just went off high order and said, God damn it, this is not the time to be making up this crazy shit. And whoever he was talking to, he lit them up like a Christmas tree and slammed the phone down, and we never did that mission. So he knew what a farce that was going to be.
Yeah.
Never practiced, never rehearsed, never been done before. Wasn't going to work.
Wow.
So put that feather in his cap that he took us out of that mission.
What were your mission capable rates like then? So if you flew 50 and then 30 in a night, you only had 70 jets. I mean, there is a Desert Storm debrief report from the Air Force that has the MC rates in it, and I'm pretty sure the F-111 was high, but
it was crazy high.
How did that come about then? How was that the case? Was it this war reserve material stash of stuff that came in?
Yeah, it was a whole combination of things. The first thing any maintainer will tell you, airplanes love flying, they hate sitting on the ground. So systems that are used day after day after day after day are way easier to maintain than one that sat for a week.
Okay.
Between hydraulics and electrics and that sort of thing. With hard crews, I suspect there were also hard maintenance crews. So they got to know the airplane. They knew the nuances, and they took care of their airplane. It was their baby. Whereas on the regular flight line, I'm sure they were bounced around a bit based on shifting and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I'm trying to think. Out of all the missions in Desert Storm, I might have ground aborted once, and just went to a spare and caught up. I don't remember ever airboarding. I think I made it to a target every time.
Wow.
I didn't always get the target. I had one mission where it was awful getting to the target, a lot of chunking and jiving early on. Got to the target, found the target, turned the laser on, no laser. And fought our way back home, disgusted. Tried everything to get the damn laser to come on. It wasn't coming on. And get into the debrief afterwards. And the crew chief says, "Hey, sir, what? You still got the weapons on board? What happened?" And I said, "No fucking later." And he goes, "Really?" And I watch him. He pulled this panel. He pulled this panel down, and there's a circuit breaker sticking out. He goes, "It's fixed, sir."
Go back.
Go back. So yeah, the airplane was amazingly reliable during that period. And I suspect all the airplanes had an increase in reliability during that period for exactly that reason.
Hmm.
No longer fighting for parts, you got all the parts you wanted. No longer fighting for crews, you got all the crews you wanted. All the priorities were stepped up, and the airplanes were used routinely.
Hmm.
So I suspect everybody's MC went sky high. But uh,
Greece, let me take you right back then to August. You go to Riyadh, you're part of the TACC or whatever it's called, you're doing the mission planning. Are you privy to the plan? Are you privy to the whole plan? I mean, are they telling you exactly what's going to happen, and rather than just compartmentalizing it?
yeah, it was a very open planning environment. Everybody was read in. And if you ever read the mission planning uh, kind of reports that came out afterwards, this was at the very early stages of John Warden's five rings and all of that. Uh, if I remember, there were concept plans floating around the Pentagon for events like this already early on. There's some stories that talk about a concept plan that was nicknamed, I think it was Desert Lightning or something like that. That presupposed that you could essentially eliminate the need for a ground war with a very rapidly executed, overwhelming air attack that would decapitate the enemy leadership and decapitate the ground forces, and they would just give up. So that was kind of the environment that the whole planning thing started in. But it was the classical plan early, plan often, because we got there in August, and by the time November came around, we had replanned that thing 20 times
Really?
because new assets were arriving, new locations were opening. Uh, uh, when we thought we had limited weapons available, all of a sudden, plenty of weapons, plan them all. We became tanker limited in the end because everybody had to pre-strike and pro-strike refuel. So the capacity of the Air Force, I mean, people don't realize it. Um, what a colossal logistical accomplishment the first night of Desert Storm was. In the first 24 hours, on the order of 1,000 airplanes out and back. Uh, more things that we had never done. So, war story of night one. Uh, there's a communications anthology of how often you're going to talk and what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and all the code words and all that sort of thing. So in the mission package, we look at the communications plan as part of the missions package, and I don't remember the exact phraseology anymore, but the term was called MCON. Emissions control was what it meant. So how we're going to control our emissions during this phase. And I don't remember if it was MCON 1 or MCON 4, whatever was the most controlled. We weren't going to do a thing. We weren't going to say a thing.
Really?
So there was zero radio transmissions from engine start to approach to landing, except for with AWACS.
Really?
So we got our mission pack, and we had never practiced this. So we had always practiced that we would launch to a known orbit point where the tankers were going to join us, and we were going to talk to the tankers. Where we always talk to the tankers, 20 miles out. Hey, Exxon 22, this is Husky Flight. 4 F-111s need 20,000 pounds each, whatever the communication was. And then as you got closer, you would communicate more. And then finally you'd say, hey, one's going to pre-contact, 2 and 3 and 4 going to the wing. Just constant talking. And you knew you were going to your tanker because you knew what L2 was at. He confirmed you were, because you knew Exxon 22. And so it was all coordinated over the radio. We coordinated nothing over the radio. The F-111 radar was horrible in the air-to-air mode. It was, let's call it, barely capable. So it took the air-to-ground beam, and you could manually steer it up. It shrank a little bit, so maybe 1.5 degree, 2 degree beam width or so. So basically a pencil beam. It had no raster capability. So you had to manually, as it went back and forth, lower it down a degree, let it go back and forth, lower it down a degree, let it go back and forth. The Wizzles got very good at what we called air math. Okay, he's 60 to 1 roll. He's 60 miles out. He's 1,000 feet above us. That's 1 degree up. So we had to do this mental gymnastics to even try to put the beam where the guy was going to be. And then you had no idea because the resolution of the radar was lousy. You got a blob. Maybe that's a set of tankers. Maybe it's not. So all of that going on. So we're heading for, a string of tanker cells. A tanker cell was roughly 6 tankers typically, all at different altitudes, and then another cell over here, another cell over here. So you had to find, and your mission package said you're going to be in the third tanker in the string at 21,000 feet, and they were maybe stacked 4,000 feet apart. Or there was some safety factor, but we're going to roll in there. I'm going to find this guy on the radar somehow. I'm going to count tankers on the radar somehow in the dark because you can't see them. And then I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and then vector my left seater into position. But the tankers had the rotating beacons out, so eventually you could see them. And we're going to bring our foreship in on this tanker, completely quiet, radio silent. Lead's going to go to the boom. 2, 3, and 4 are going to go up to the wing. As soon as lead connects, 2 is going to come down and fly on his wing.
Huh.
So to cut the time down.
Yeah.
And as soon as lead was full, he'd go to the left wing. 2 would come down, get in pre-contact. 3 would come down and fly off of his wing. So we would cut the refueling time by probably 30, 40%, just getting repositioned. No comms.
Wow.
And then after we're topped off, no comms. We'd all be on the left wing. We would just student body left and go to our hold point, awaiting our launch time. And it was all pre-planned. So we sat at our hold point, I don't know, at 30,000 feet or so, waiting for and the clock said your foreship will move forward at 02:30 and 37 seconds, whatever our go time was. And my left seater was a mission package commander, foreship flight lead. So I was in lead airplane, and we sat there in our orbit port, waiting for our time to go. And then and there was more mental gymnastics because if you were outbound and your time to go, you had to do math to get inbound to right air, all that. And now we're all separated, flying separate altitudes and airspeeds and everything. And then I'll never forget this. The first night, I did some of the planning, so I knew there was a boatload of airplanes all in these orbits south of the border, waiting to go. One knucklehead still had his lights on, so we could see him. There's a check you go in combat, that you check all these things before you go over into the enemy territory, and he forgot that part because in peacetime you never ever turn the lights off. So, but nobody's going to tell him. Nobody's going to break radio silence and say that, hey, dude, you got your lights on, because you know it was. And the only thing on the radio with AWACS, with their they had a little tape recorder. This is 10% true. They had a tape recorder in the AWACS that they just pressed the button on. It said every 30 seconds, picture clear. Picture clear. It was months after the Desert Shield and Desert Storm that we realized that the AWACS radar couldn't see north of Baghdad from where they were. So it was always going to be picture clear up there. But anyways, so I was really worried about running into, because we were at medium altitude. We were going to do a combat descent down a train following and roll in low altitude. And I was really worried that we were going to run into somebody doing that because there were so many airplanes. So I know I'll use the air-to-air radar that I'm very good at all of a sudden. And I'm going to be able to see the airplane that we're going to hit, and I will be able to avoid it. So we're in the hold, and we're about to turn north for our last leg inbound. We were probably 20 miles up south of our departure point on time, and everything was turned off. I turned the air-to-air radar on. It made 2 sweeps, and it looked like the Milky Way. I turned it off. It's not gonna help. There's nothing I'm gonna be able to do with that. There were that many airplanes out in front of us.
Wow.
So just turned it off and did our combat descent and didn't run into anybody. And then, like I said, after about a week, we were all medium altitude. And so the deconfliction was based on altitude and time and route and distance and all that. So I don't know that we had any mid airs and all of that. I don't remember any reports of mid airs.
That's
So,
crazy.
but yeah, that turn the radar on first time. Oh, going into that, turn it off. But you could put the Pave Tac pod out and see the hundreds of little white dots, but it's very draggy. So your fuel planning was tossed out the window.
Yeah.
So we couldn't leave it out. You would never make it home on gas if you left it out the whole time. So that too was rotated down for an ops check to make sure it was working. Saw all the little white dots. You go, nope, that's not going to help me either. Put that thing back up.
What was your target that night then? What was your first target?
Airfield, all
Do you
airfields.
remember which one for you?
Mhm.
Hmm. And what
There
were you
was
doing? You were
H. There was so many H's and so many L's and so many. You know, probably 10 years after I've probably forgotten it by that point already.
yeah.
But the original mission set for the we were the heavy hitters and laser guided bombs, except for the 117. They can only carry two, and there weren't a whole lot of them. Um, so we would carry four every night. Um, and the first couple of airfields we went after, the Iraqi shelters, the hardened aircraft shelters, were a bit of a mystery to us. We got some good intel on where they were, how many, and that kind of thing, but we didn't really have a good gauge on their structure. So the first couple of nights we planned two penetrators each.
Mhm.
So that was the other bizarre realization of the first night. We had never planned to reattack ever.
Mhm.
Everybody knows that if you go light up a target and you come back, you're dead in the second pass, guaranteed. And the first night we're doing two passes on every target. And putting two 2,000-pound penetrators in every aircraft shelter that we could find. And then by the fourth or fifth day, we realized one was plenty, that those things were not nearly as hard as everyone thought they were. And we could do four. We could do four. So now we're coming back four times from medium altitude.
But your first mission though, so if you're at medium altitude, you're doing a combat descent. You're doing a combat descent for a low level strike.
Mm-hmm.
So what were you dropping on those missions then? You were still dropping GBU 10?
No,
Or
24. So we did that bizarre.
oh, you were doing the GBU
Oh
24s on
yeah,
those missions.
yeah.
Okay. And you were hitting, so with the GBU 24, that's a 2,000 pound. Were you hitting the runway? Were you hitting taxiway, or were you hitting always shelters?
All shelters. All
Always
shelters.
shelters. So how many GBU 24? You could carry four GBU 24s then.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, because it's only a two. Yeah, it's a 2,000 pound weapon. Okay, so
Yeah, you
wow,
can put a 5,000 pounder out there on the pylon, but we didn't do that till the very end.
that was the GBU 28. Is that
Yep.
right? The 5,000 pound. Okay, okay. So wow. Okay, so you're going in low level. You're doing this crazy pop up four
Yep.
times against the same airfield.
Yep.
And there's how many airplanes in are striking? How many F-111s are striking an airfield in the same sort of?
Some were 8, some were 20. I mean, it all depends
Wow.
on what they thought was there. In the medium altitude, it was almost always 20 because it was very easy to deconflict everybody. We ditched all the radio silent stuff. We were talking to each other
Mm.
a lot on the radios. It became a very benign environment by week three-ish, maybe week two, compared to the first couple of nights that was just hair on fire the entire time. Um,
Can you can
uh,
you can you tell us a bit more about that part of it, Grease? So, were you shot at? What were you shot at by? How did it
oh
feel?
yeah, yeah. This is where I suspect Starbase would tell you that the Wild Weasel made a big difference in the Vietnam era, um, but they were absolutely the bread and butter in Desert Storm. Uh, every package went in Weasel support, and uh, we, I mean, I, we watched it happen in real time. So we're rolling into a target, and a big package going to this target area, and you heard the wheedle 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 on the tape that you heard. It's just going off constantly. The radar warning receiver. There are so many numbers on it, you can't even distinguish what's on it. So it too was useless. The useless sensor that didn't do us any good because it was just maxed out. And then you'd see it's at night, so you'd see the rocket flash or the SAM coming up. And that's the other thing people don't realize. We're trained in daytime. Vietnam era SA2 coming at you, you'll see that big telephone pole from a distance, and you'll do some Hayaka maneuver to avoid it and make the fuse go off. And go, that ain't happening at night because you're never going to see it. So all you see is this flash from the ground off in the distance, and you see the plume burning for as long as it burns, and then it burns out. Now you see nothing until a weasel is behind you, and a horn goes screaming over the top of your airplane, and you see it in the high altitude, and where the missile went stupid because the harm went to the ground and took out the radar. So yeah, there were I I I think even night one, the Weasel guys were not radio silent. And when they shot, they did the magic words Magnum, Magnum, so that you knew that this missile coming overhead was not an issue.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was just Magnum calls constantly. I mean, all you heard Magnum, and you saw all these explosions on the ground where the harms were hitting the sites. So we had one mission where uh, we were lit with a SAM, and the weasels were there. They did their thing, but for whatever reason, the missile got close enough and detonated under the airplane, took out one of our motors, and we had a very long flight home on one engine at around 8,000 feet, a couple hundred knots, just nursing the airplane all the way home. And it was one of those, we didn't have hydraulic, we didn't see hydraulic leak. We didn't think we had any serious damage to the airplane other than the motor. And so normally when the airplane's got a problem, you land in the first piece of concrete available.
Hmm.
And there were airfields designated all around Saudi Arabia that you could go land at. Some of them were unoccupied. It was just like, the Mid East was at war so often that there were runways all over the place that became disused over time. So that we had all those marked out. We were going to go land there and camp out, wait for somebody to come get us, because the AWACS would follow you down and know what you were doing. But as we just lily padded our way all the way back to Taif. Okay, next airfield's 20 miles. We're still good. Next airfield's 40 miles. We're still good. Next airfield's 50 miles. So I can see Taif. Let's go to Taif. Because the last thing we wanted to do was spend the night in the airplane, at some abandoned airfield with unknown recovery and unknown support and unknown departure. So we nursed that airplane all the way home. And it turned out that whatever happened under the airplane, there's a cone in the intake that changes its position forward, aft, and diameter to monkey with the shock waves going down the intake for supersonic flight. And the controller for that thing had failed in that event, so it put the entire cone into the intake. So the intake was essentially blocked.
So, and
So
do you know what it was that I don't want to say hit you, but
no, but it was bright. I mean, there were a couple of times when something came near us, and this is another classic, war story, 10% true kind of thing. Uh, uh, by the time the medium altitude part came around, um, you did not want to be the crew that came back with a weapon. You're going to go out with four, you're going to come back empty, and you're going to hit four targets. So they literally had the scoreboard up in the mission planning cell of every crew, what their mission takeoff rate was, how many times they were planned and took off, what their air abort rate was. There was a scorecard for everything. It was like Vegas. And they were like, maybe somebody's taking bets on odds and all this stuff. But up until that point, my left seater and our hit the target rate was 100%.
wow.
He would call it the ever and all important mission success rate was the term we used. And you got creative between the two of you, at least in our airplane, of what lies you told each other to keep the mission going. So his best lie was the AAA is not so bad over here, and he would move the airplane that way. And my lie was I've got the target. So we went in. We were in some airfield mission somewhere, and there was a lot of AAA, and we were lower than average. So we were fighting this AAA the entire time, and it was, you could just see it everywhere. And I'm in the targeting pod in the feed bag trying to find the damn target, and uh, the airplane was moving a lot more than average. and that would upset the targeting pod because the roll gimbal wasn't great and all that, you know. So I'm fighting with the targeting pod, and he's fighting with the airplane, and he puts like 5 Gs on the airplane and pulls hard over to one spot and rolls out really good. He goes, okay, it's clear here, and yeah, whatever. And all of a sudden, boom, big explosion, super bright light. The airplane shook like crazy. I was sure we mid-aired or something. I mean, it was absolutely violent. And the classic call on the tape that I wish I could have got that tape says, "If it's so fucking clear over there, what the hell was that?" And the airplane didn't have any damage to it. Went up, got the target, and no problem. But yeah, it was the first few days. There was a lot of AAA, a lot of missiles, a lot of chucking and jiving, a lot of seat cushions being sucked up your rear end in the airplane. But by day 10ish, it just crashed. I mean, it was completely different environment by the end of the second week. Um,
Were
and
you were you anticipating that though? So one of the things that Pyro and Super said to me was that Glosson, I think Glosson had visited them, may have been Horner, but some Air Force bigwig had visited them and said we're expecting 30% loss rates and on the first night. Did you get that number down as to your squadron as well, to your unit as well?
100%. Yeah, yeah. In fact, I wasn't on the very first wave. I was in this follow-on wave, and we were all out on the flight line counting airplanes coming back.
Hmm.
And we were like, "Holy crap! It's all of them." We couldn't. We were in total disbelief that every airplane came back, and we immediately rushed those guys. Says, "What was it like? What happened? What did you do?" And you know, we tried to pull out all the info we can out of them. You know, we didn't lose a single 111 in the entire Desert Storm.
Yeah. But can I
We
ask
lost.
you about that then? What do you attribute that to? I mean, I think you have so many aeroplanes, 70 of them, that the chances of you losing one, of course, go up. Well, the chances don't go up, but
Sure.
the numbers in relative terms go up. You think about the F-16s. There were hundreds of F-16s. There was like 250. I don't even know how many there were. Strike Eagles. What did they were initially 24 that came from the Rocketeers, and then the Chiefs turned up as well. So there were maybe 50 of them
Maybe
eventually.
50. Yeah.
Not even that probably. They lost 3 or 4 jets. You guys had 70, lost none. What is that down to? Because yeah, let me
It's
just
hard to
let me end
say.
the question there. What is that down to?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, it wasn't like they were giving us the undefended targets.
Hmm.
There wasn't any of that kind of bifurcation in the planning operation. But I think generally, uh, by the time we had the benefit of being, as other squadrons arrived later than we did, they didn't have the run up we did. There were guys that got there in August that were flying in that environment all the way through January, practicing and getting and honing their skills and all that. Other folks showed up in December, and just were thrown into it. The 111 community was very much, and of course, I'll put a lot of it on two-seater airplane. Having two guys divide and conquer the mission tasks makes a huge difference. The Air Force has completely abandoned that with the F-22 and the F-35. But the reality is, anybody who's been in a two-place airplane will tell you it is more combat effective with two brains in the operation versus one. So I think the crews are very mature. The ops group commander did a phenomenal job of setting a atmosphere of seriousness and all that. The airplane is mechanically very survivable, lots of redundancies. Um, uh, and once we got out of the high AAA environment, there was really no real threat to it. Um, there was no
And
air there.
it's also, I mean, it is also noteworthy that you didn't lose one in the build up either. You just mentioned the
Lost
build
one
up,
in the
but
buildup.
one was lost in the build up. Okay, what was that down to? Was that a low level thing?
No, really, really sad. Uh, let's call it unintentional fratricide. Um, the the guys were up north towards the border, um, heading south, and they got their radar warning receiver lit up on their 6 o'clock that they were being targeted by an unknown fighter. So they convinced themselves it was an Iraqi MiG that got through snuck through the defenses, somehow figured out and targeted them. So they did a combat descent into the ground.
Oh, okay, okay. And
The
what did that turn out to be eventually? Was that an eagle? Okay.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
dear. Okay.
yeah. But the combat descent to terrain following was a pretty complex maneuver because you had to get the terrain following system to do its thing. And to convince yourself it was doing its thing, there were specific points in the combat descent that the airplane behaved specific ways to tell you that the terrain following system was doing what it was supposed to do. And if you exceeded the dive angle, if you exceeded the speeds, um, and nobody ever did combat descent to 200 feet, though we did it to 1,000 feet. And then there's a knob in the airplane, 1,000, whatever the increments were, 800, 500, 200. We call it stepping down, where you would, level off at 1,000 feet, make sure train fall, and then go lower, lower, lower. There's some belief that they went straight to 200 feet, in fear, and they went and were going crazy fast, possibly even supersonic, because the airplane would do that. If you cleaned off the wings and threw the wings back and pointed those to the ground, you'll be supersonic pretty quickly. So they could have been supersonic where the train following radar doesn't have the turn radius gets really, really big. We think of turn radius left and right, but it's vertical as well. So the train following system is calculating when to start the pullout, and supersonic, his calculations were wrong.
Mm.
The airplane wasn't cleared supersonic train following. So any number one of those things could have contributed to the point where they basically hit the dirt with a perfectly good airplane, escaping what they thought was a threat.
Was this a nighttime thing?
Oh yeah,
Was that
yeah.
night? Okay. How much of that were you able to ascertain at the time? I mean, and what does that do to you as a a community who are deployed to go to combat? How do you have to just put that to the back of your mind, stop thinking about it?
Oh no, it was a big wake up call. I want to say it was December timeframe, so not quite a month before combat started. Uh, there was some angst in the community at the point because we did some training during the day, just because keeping all the AWACS busy and all of that. So there was night crews and day crews, and then you would flip flop, and some of the scheduling of that was imperfect, and there were people starting to complain that, hey, I just did a night mission, why you put me on a day mission? My sleep patterns are messed up, and that sort of angst was growing a little bit. And when that airplane was lost, everything changed. It was hard crews for sure, hard scheduling for sure. Everything was checked twice. So a bit of a wake up call that maybe things had gotten a little bit too loose and fast in the fervor of getting ready, and everything had to be kind of ironed out, buttoned down.
Talk a little, Greece, about the low level side of things. Then we said right at the beginning of this, well, you said right at the beginning of this conversation about going in medium altitude, and I'd reference later the F-111, the tornadoes, the RAF tornadoes, and their low level approach. And I've been fortunate enough to have one of the Desert Storm, or Granby as we called it, tornado crews come and be on the channel, including JP, who was shot down and became a familiar face as a prisoner of war. Um, so they had the RAF tornado detachments had therefore a low level mission in which they did experience losses. What were you, as the F-111 community, doing in terms of watching what they were doing? Were you watching them? Were you just concerned with your own business? What was driving, or what did drive the move for you guys from low level to the medium altitude? And what are your observations then about the RAF's experience with the low level environment, based on
Yeah. So
you having trained to it?
yeah. So the word we got back generally, I mean, every mission's different. But what we got back early on was that the tornadoes were dying wholesale because of I don't think they called the munition Durandal. I think that was the U.S. version of it, but runway busting,
Mm.
where they literally had to fly down the runway and plink out the weapons. So that was acknowledged early on as true or not. We believe that was the cause of the losses, that it was tactically very, very difficult to pull that off, and survive it. And if you're doing the aircraft shelters away from the runways, and away from the main defenses with a little bit of standoff with the triple LGB or at medium altitude, even more standoff. You were able to maneuver and avoid and be constantly moving and not be as easily targetable as somebody who had to roll in a mile short of the runway, get down to low altitude and fly straight down the damn runway predictably for 30 to 50 seconds, and be shot at by everything they got sitting there. So uh, it was literally the ELINT collections that told us, very quickly that the like the 117s going out after a lot of the surveillance radars and that sort of thing. The electronic environment degraded very quickly. So by day 6 or 7, we just weren't collecting the surface-to-air missile threat density that we were on day 1. And with all the losses to AAA, I don't think we were told that most of the tornadoes were shot to techno AAA, not with SAMs. Because at low altitude, the Iraqis didn't have much in the way of a SAM system that could get you other than maybe the SA-6. And even then, without a surveillance radar telling where to point, that's problematic. So we assumed it was all AAA, and what the a phrase that reverberated through the community was, the PK of the ground is about 1.0. Let's not be where the ground is if we don't have to be. And at medium altitude with the weasels, it was you were safe in your mother's arms. Very quickly, the medium altitude became the way to go. It avoided 90% of the AAA threat. If an occasional missile came up, the weasel would take care of them, and they did. And then you even had you had time. If by that time by week 3 or 4, if you were targeted by an Iraqi SAM, you knew it, because now there was only one symbol on your radar warning receiver. All of the progressions from surveillance radar to tracking radar to command and control signals to the missile, if it was command guided, and all of those symbols and all that was very apparent to you. And you would see the missile coming up. I mean, you'd see the missile coming up, and it wasn't going off in different directions. So it became a completely different environment. And so medium L2 was absolutely the right way to go. It just scared the bejesus out of us the first few times we did it, because we had never trained it. It was all of our training was low altitude, and even the cadence in the airplane changed, because now you're dropping a weapon 5-6 miles out, not 2 miles out. So the timing and when to turn the laser on and when to roll and when to all that was different. And what became super important was nailing your release time, because we had airplanes coming from different directions at different times, and it was timing deconfliction for a lot of it. I mean, you've probably seen videos in World War II where B-17 formation and the bombs from one B-17 went through another B-17. So that absolutely can't happen. So getting to your target release time plus or minus 5 seconds was how you survived. And with practice, you could easily do it within a second.
And were you doing this in some kind of so you already mentioned this sort of daisy chain type reattack pattern, or whatever you want to call it. Were you doing the same thing then? If you were just going to go and drop on one target, were you sort of then in a sort of line abreast, or were you in a trail? How did you how did you reformate at the end of it to come
Didn't
back to
reformate.
base? You didn't.
Yeah, we all went home single ship.
Okay.
Yeah, so once we left the tanker and got to our push point, we go to our push point, we call it, south of the border as a 4-ship, but we all had different times. So it would be, I hate the word bomber train, but that's basically what it turned out to be. You ended up deconflicted en route. And then you would come across a target, and some guys would, let's just make up easy numbers, go north, south to north. So the lead airplane maybe would go straight south to north, hit his target, carry through, do the laser guided turn, come back around from the east, do the target, come back around from the south, and then a pre-planned series of turns to get, and then everybody else did the same thing.
Wow.
So some guys would have to, in the train, turn off to the east first, so they were going east to west to begin with. Other guys would turn off to the west first and go west to east, and other guys would carry on straight through and come from the south. It was all orchestrated in the planning early on. and then deconflict. Everybody had their own altitude, so you were deconflicted by 500 or 1,000 feet in altitude, so you couldn't hit each other.
Okay. So there was some big sky theory, but there was deconfliction. Okay, that makes sense. So how did you ever get given dynamic targeting then? So, and by that I mean, so I think about the Strike Eagles. So the Strike Eagles guy, they initially didn't have many. I don't think they even had that many nav pods. They definitely didn't have target pods initially. Then target pods turned up in theater. The Chiefs got them. I think they had something like six. I mean, it was a tiny
Yeah,
number, and then they had to share three with the rockets, and and then they went after scuds. So initially they had the fixed scud sites they went after, and then they had mobile scuds, and they were hitting things like camel herds and Winnebagos and things like that, not deliberately, but because they couldn't disambiguate between those and what they were actually seeing. Were you given similar taskings? Were you always going against sort of strategic type fixed targets, or were you also looking dynamically into the battlefield to kill things that you hadn't been actually tasked prior to?
yeah. So all of ours were pre-planned because we were so far away.
Okay.
So we didn't get later in the Strike Eagle. I did deliberate force and those kind of missions. Sometimes you went out without a target at all, and you're going to be handed a target once airborne. You know, but in our cases, we didn't we never changed targets. I had one classical mission. Um, you could change target. Well, part of it was for a laser guided bomb. You wanted a photograph of the target because there'd be a target complex with multiple things that your formation was going to go after. And in planning, the order of which that they were going to be hit mattered because the smoke could get in the way of your laser and all that kind of thing. So doing that on the fly wasn't going to work out. But I had one mission where we had planned. This was beautiful. We this was probably week 5 or 6 or so. Um, so things were getting a little bit less pre-planned because they were running out of pre-planned things to do. So you're given an area instead of a target. And basically, like we were doing tank blinking, you weren't given a tank. You're given a kill box. We didn't call it kill boxes back then, but that's what it was. And so you would just go in, roll in, find one that wasn't burning and hit it. But we had a mission. I don't remember what our original target was, but I had 4 penetrators on the airplane. So it was probably an airfield target of some sort. And I'm in the airplane. Uh, Engine started, all good to go. And next thing I know, the left seater's looking over the canopy, and he's shutting off the engine, shutting off the left engine. Like, what the hell? You know, he goes, oh, somebody's running up to the airplane waving, and you want to get down the intake, so this another crewman, I don't know who it was literally sprinting out of the planning cell up to our airplane, and then shut the engines off. He handed us a target package, and there was no photograph, there was no radar prediction, there was no imagery, nothing. It was a target folder with a torn up piece of paper and a set of coordinates. I said, what the hell is this? And he goes, you're going after a probable suspected mobile command vehicle.
Ooh.
And I went, got any idea what it looks like? He goes, think of a Winnebago. So I wasn't catching on what was going on, but that was the mission. And I looked over and said, dude, I got 4 penetrators on the airplane. What am I going to do with those? He goes, use all 4 of them. So we rolled in there solo, no support, no package, just us. We were peeled off from everything to go do this and turned the Pave Tac pod on. And there was half a dozen Winnebagos. And I told my left seater, says, dude, there are just so many. He goes, the biggest one. So we did. We put 4 2,000 pounders into the biggest one. And
Obviously, it didn't have.
didn't have the intended effect.
No.
But
Wow.
that was the extent of my dynamic targeting experience, where everything else was pretty well pre-planned. And then on that mission, nope, here's a set of coordinates, go bomb it.
Did you? Well, I mean, one of the things that you think of, I suppose, from a humanistic point of view with regards to war, is things like the highway of death. You look at that, and you what we now know, and probably at the time knew, but we definitely know now is that it was a conscript force for the most part. The Republican Guard was a professional force, and they were Hussein's best troops, I think. But there was a lot of conscription going along, um, and I wonder, when you're sort of doing this, you get to week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're becoming, you are these precision um, strike sort of tools. You're going out there. I think the media saw what you guys were doing, and coined the term precision strike and surgical strike, and they came out with this language that made it sound like you could put your death dot on something and it would die. And I just wonder whether or not you, as somebody who was there, who was part of that, do you ever look back on the humanistic side of things, or did you at the time? Did you get to thinking about the Iraqis on the ground? Um, One of the things that you hear from people who've been to war, and very understandably, it's either him or me. He's trying to kill me. I don't want to die. I'm gonna kill him. He has to die. I get that. When you're doing it almost with impunity, does it take on a different feeling? Do you think about it differently?
Yeah, I don't think I did. I was in my 20s. Um, I was gung-ho tactical aviator type. Sent on a mission, signed up, never actually necessarily internalizing the last part of our oath of office where it says, and I'll, give my life in their defense. I'm not quite sure we all perfectly internalized that as we, got checked out in the airplane. But I think you end up rationalizing it that way, that as you said, it's just me or him, and I'm going to be the one surviving this. Later on in the F-15, we learned a slightly different environment because in the air-to-air game, it's exactly that way.
Hmm.
And many air-to-air engagements, only one guy's leaving. So you were trained a different mindset in that perspective too. But I think we all found our own ways to inoculate ourselves from that thought process while we were doing it. But it was inescapable when we got home. And it was absolutely that thought that drove me to test pilot school.
Oh, I didn't realize you went that route as well. Okay.
Yeah. So when I got back to Lake and Heath, we did, oh my God, we did provide comfort 1, 2, and 3. We were just constantly going back and for missions that were a lot less important and as we thought. And I had an epiphany. I mean, I was dropping a 25-pound practice bomb in Wainfleet, uh, recalling the dangers that even that can introduce. And I went, there's got to be something else I can do. So I literally had a heart to heart with the group commander and said, this is what I'm dealing with.
Hmm.
He goes, Greece, you're the perfect candidate for test pilot school then. And, you know, after I retired, people asked me, well, why didn't you go do X, Y, and Z? I said, the entire time I was in combat aviation, I knew what I was doing. I was good at it. I accepted that mission. I don't actually have regrets, but if we could turn back time and start over and live our lives differently, I would much rather be a guy building bridges than blowing them up.
Hmm.
So the test community offered me a different track there. It removed you from the combat part of it. You were enabling those guys, and they were my friends. So that was all cool. But yeah, I afterwards, I said to myself, I got to do something different. And so the test track, did that for me. But then I went right back into combat after that. So, so there was no real escaping it. But there was a no kidding shift in my mindset after the other storm, all of that, and you know, nobody talks about it. It's really interesting. I mean, we go to reunion events and that sort of thing, and I got to believe a lot of us internally struggled with things like that and just didn't say a thing
Hmm.
and just carried on, did the mission. There were certainly some very hardcore aviators out there that maybe never gave it a second thought. but I suspect that 80% of them had a human component in their psyche that at some spectrum of dealing with that had had to deal with it.
Yeah. I suppose if if you're being shot at, it's different, isn't it? If it, I mean, you guys in your business don't want a fair fight.
Right.
Antithetical to what you're all about. If you're not cheating, you ain't trying, right? So
Bring a nuke to a knife fight.
exactly, you don't want that. But if they're not at least getting a fighting chance, then I'm sure, yeah, that must be difficult to, yeah. Okay.
I
Anyway,
think I think it really wasn't that personal until tank planking, really, because hitting a shelter on an airfield, the chance of being somebody in that shelter wasn't terribly high.
hmm,
It wasn't even a very high chance. There was an airplane in there actually, because he had learned this. We actually we actually had a mission, and we went and bombed dirt. The intel guys, got some great images for us of the Iraqis burying their airplanes somewhere to preserve them for the next round. And we got the coordinates of the burial site. So we sent a 10 ship after the burial site and just put 2,000 pounders into the dirt just to show them, if you think you're going to hide them, it ain't going to work. We can hit that too.
you get any BDA photographs of that? Did anyone know?
Yeah, I never heard back.
Wow.
But but that's another part of warfare is sometimes it's just strategic messaging.
Hmm.
We did get some airplanes hit that were in orchards or wherever, hiding under trees. We were able to find some of those. And that's instant BDA because you found the airplane.
Hmm.
But sometimes we did missions just because we could. Just tell it if you think your whatever plan you have is working. Sorry to tell you, it's not because we're ahead of you on this, we're ahead of you on that, and that sort of thing. So
Yeah. I think there's some very unpleasant video from March 2003 of Strike Eagles hitting things like Sea Furies on Iraqi airfields, which is just, that's a crime against humanity for sure. They should never have been allowed to do that. But that's very interesting. Just saying you can do, because obviously something like a Sea Fury is not going to be it's on a it's either going to be on a stick or it's going to be derelict somewhere, but it's definitely not going to be doing anything combative. So, but speaking of that, actually, then, and talking about the loss during the build up, what were your thoughts then on Iraqi Air Force and how you were going to handle the possibility of being intercepted? I mean, the 111 famously fast, but the Iraqis had MiG-25, MiG-23, also famously fast. What was was it all about getting down to low level and just running as quickly as you could? Anything
and
fancy up your sleeve other than that?
and overwhelming confidence in our OCA and DCA brethren. Um, we completely believed that at low altitude they weren't going to find us. If they did try to intercept us, our guys would intercept them. I didn't give the air-to-air threat a second thought.
Right.
In the dark, especially, um, they would have had to have everything work perfectly to find one of us and pull out. No one's got to meet him out to a different story, but by then they were all gone. I don't remember. I don't even remember AWACS even telling us there was another airplane airborne by week 2 or 3. Um, at some point, there was no air threat. We still had all the Eagles, everybody else are with us. But I didn't give the air-to-air threat a second thought. It was all about the SAMs initially, because that's what we were trained. We were trained SAMs are killers. Got to stay low to avoid the SAMs. AAA will be here and there. No, it was just AAA was in unimaginably dense. It was just bullets everywhere. And then you remind yourself, although tracers are like every 10th bullet or every 20th bullet, it's not every bullet. So whatever you think you see, there's orders of magnitude more than that in the air, and you're flying through it. It became a AAA threat in the end.
What was your, I want to say escape and evasion plan, but that's probably not the right sort of language. But you obviously are going to go out in the capsule. That's a very big thing that can be seen a long way off in a flat desert. Are you just going to, as soon as you get on the ground, hightail it out of there as quickly as you can? Are you going to stay with it? What do you do?
Yeah, so that was exactly the thoughts going through our mind. We were heading south with on one motor, and we said, listen, let me do the math in my head here. So every 5 seconds in the air is a day's walk.
Wow. Okay.
So stay with the airplane as long as it's not tumbling was kind of our head south, point south, and Starbury said the same thing we learned in Vietnam. Airplanes don't blow up, they burn.
Mm.
So, actually, maybe 105 did, but most airplanes burn. Uh, we had a peacetime event at Lake and Heath. I want to say it was after Desert Storm. The timing is fuzzy now, but we had an airplane catch on fire and it burned for probably 2 minutes before the guys bailed out.
Really?
I mean, a non-combat story, but it was a training event at one of the EW ranges in north of Lake and Heath. I've long since forgotten the name.
Sped AM, probably.
Yeah, it's Spade Adam. Yeah, yep, that's what it was. And it was a competition, turkey shoot sort of thing. So they had cameras on the ground, which are very unusual. Everybody's being graded on target acquisition and timing over target and all that. And this force ship rolls in, and it's reconstructed after the mission. But in real time, it didn't happen this way. But on the ground, you saw this airplane coming across, and the guy on the ground is saying, "Here comes whatever the call sign was, Husky 22. Looks like he's on time. He looks like he's found his target. He's on track." And all of a sudden, all you see is this orange ball, and this orange ball is going across in the camera, and you can't even see the airplane. All you see is orange and a black trail of smoke.
Wow.
And it just stays orange, and then it goes out of the camera view. Meanwhile, the lead airplane is I want to say it was number 2, might have been 3, but lead airplane comes off target and then turns hard away from the target so that the next guy can come up next to him. They can reform, going off target. And in that turn, the Wizzo's eyeballing, the airplane, and he sees the orange ball. And this was an EW training event, so they're calling out SAMs, and there were smoky SAMs being shot and all this going on. So there's this constant battle going on in the airplane. And then next thing you hear in the tape is, "Holy shit, 2's on fire!" And the pilot goes, "Yeah, 2's on fire." And it took several exchanges, and the Wizzo literally grabbed his oxygen mask and shook it. Said, "No, dude, you don't get it. 2's on fire, real time." And he looks over, and all he sees is an orange ball flying along. So in the airplane, the guys don't see the orange ball because it's behind the cockpit. It's all stuff burning behind them. Yeah. And we call it the Christmas tree because there's this big panel of warning lights in the lower left part of the dashboard, and warning lights were coming on. And so the Wizzo was dutifully pulling out the checklist and figuring out, okay, electrical failure, what do we do? Oh, no, it's hydraulic failure, what do we do? Oh, no, it's double. He's got his finger in 8 different checklists trying to sort out this problem. Next thing you know, the whole damn thing is, and they realize that's not an emergency. There's something terribly wrong with the airplane. So the next thing you hear is lead looking back at him, seeing that this isn't going to work out. And he gets on the radio, it says, "Husky 22, you're on fire, turn east, bail out, bail out, bail out."
Wow.
And so the two look at each other like, he says, "You got to bail out." He goes, "You ready?" He goes, "Hell yeah." They went. And they said in the capsule, they saw the rest of the airplane, hit the water.
Really?
So we were going to stay in the airplane as long as we could in adversary band, because every few seconds in the air was a day's walk, and we were going to get as far south as we could, assuming that we were capable post ejection, because almost everybody in the airplane that ejected in F-111 got injured. The airbags were not great, but they were never tested. You can't test it. Once you're in the airplane, they're there forever. There's no inspection. They have blowout plugs that don't blow out because they stuck in there for 20 years, whatever. The parachute wouldn't guarantee a flat cushion anyways. And there was another component that nobody wanted to admit, but I saw it in real time. This is where negative training impacts your life. In the T-38 running up to F-111 training, there was this training series. It was called LIFT, Lead-In Fighter Training. And you did some fighter training in the T-38 airplane. It was a variant called the AT-38. And you could drop bombs and do some practice air-to-air and that sort of thing. But the community in the T-38 totally wrongfully believed that the higher you sat up in the cockpit, the better visibility you had. And they completely disregarded the notion that whoever designed the cockpit understood where your eyes should be, what you're going to look through, where the dashboard was going to be in the way or not. And there was a optimal place to put your seat that everybody disregarded and ran all the way up. So you'd watch guys 230 and they're flying like this because their seats all the way jacked up and they're got somebody told them that's the best way to see. You translate that to the F-111, and there were a number of crews that did exactly the same thing. And the headrest in the F-111 is fixed to the airframe.
Hmm.
So if you ran the seat all the way up, your head was above the headrest. But you were never in the headrest because you were never there. You're always here. But if you ejected, you were going to be, all the way back, head hopefully in the headrest and ready for the impact when you hit the ground. Well, if your head's above the headrest, it doesn't have support. And neck injuries were almost guaranteed,
Yeah.
as were back injuries, that sort of thing. But that particular crew, I don't recall that they had any injury. I think they both walked out of the capsule.
Did that play on your mind? I mean, you're in a risky business, so again, it's
Oh yeah,
but does the idea that your last resort is actually not that attractive?
yeah. There's another great 10% true story of a crew coming across the ocean, and I did a couple of those missions, and it is bizarre because you're flying over the North Atlantic, looking down where the Titanic used to be, and there's all these floating glacier things look down below you, and you're going, yeah, if we land in that, we're done. It'll be days before a boat comes to get us. And there was a crew going westbound, and the dashboard catches on fire, and the smoke is just poured into the cockpit, and they're doing all the electrical failure things to try to stop it, and it's just not working. And there's a HF radio in the airplane, and at that time there was a Lockheed crew 24/7 on that channel that you could call and say, I got a major problem with the airplane. I need real technical help with the airplane. And they would find the right engineer to come help you. So they went through that series, and they got the guy on the radio, and the guy said, wait, we turned off master circuit breaker number 2 or whatever. He was going through the electrical system. And he goes, yeah, we did that. And we did that. And we did that. And the guys went through 4 or 5 things. And the guy says, well, shit, Lieutenant, short of pissing out and running out of ideas. So they brought the airplane into Gander. They landed, I think Gander's in Newfoundland, somewhere well short of the United States. And they stayed with the airplane and opened the vents and tried to suck in 100% oxygen on oxygen mask and got the airplane to the first available airfield versus floating in the capsule, because that was going to be a very suboptimal solution in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Even you probably heard the term poopy suits. We always flew poopy suits from about probably March. Yeah, probably like October to March, we were always in poopy suits.
Okay. But the capsule, so it had a bilge pump built in.
Yep.
The stick could turn into a bilge pump, right?
Yep.
Was it supposed to be watertight?
Well, so we always joked it was like that Seinfeld line. I know what a waterproof watch is. What's a water resistant watch? It puts up a good fight and then fails. So that's how we thought of the waterproofing of the capsule, that there was going to be water in the capsule. And yeah, it was going to be the Wizzo's job to reach down into the water and pull the pin out and then reset it and use the stick as a bilge pump. And the mythology was, well, only the Wizzo stick would work. The pilot stick doesn't work. So the Wizzo's got to do it. But never actually trained it, never actually pulled the pin, whatever you're supposed to do. I never actually, there's like half a dozen pins on the canopy rail that depending on what phase of the ejection you're supposed to, never did any of that. So no clue any of that stuff worked.
No.
Some guys would just joke, I'll just pull them all.
Yeah, because there were little flotation bags, weren't there, on the top surface, so it was supposed to right itself if it landed
Exactly.
upside down. Is that right? So I think some of those pins were to do with that, weren't they? So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
But
interesting.
there was one death in the airplane where the center canopy rail, like between the 2 seats, underneath that structure is the cable that attaches to the parachutes, and it attaches right in front of the glass and over behind your head. And that, in the sequence of explosive bolts, whenever that cavity would be exposed and the cable would come out, and then the parachute would go. Where that cable was attached in the front of the capsule was like a little pool. And so water got in there, it corroded, and as soon as the parachute opened, it pulled that bolt right out, and the capsule went down without a parachute.
Wow. Wow.
They found the
Well,
capsule and the guys in it, and they could tell that the attachment point had just been pulled out.
was that when you were at Lake Heath? Was that earlier than that?
Yeah, after I left the airplane.
Wow.
Because in some accident reports, but either because I went into the safety business, so I was reading all these accident reports.
Yeah.
So I never heard of that mission. It was what I read about. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of confidence in the capsule.
Okay, so at this point in the conversation, I ran out of time and I said to Greece that we needed to wrap up. So we did that, and he offered some overall observations about Desert Storm and the Air Force in general, and we hit stop. And I said to him, you know what? I had loads more questions and I could have gone on for another couple of hours. And he felt the same way. In fact, the next day he sent me an email with a list of things that he had thought would be good to discuss. So what I've done is I've trimmed the episode here, so there is no sort of outro, there's no goodbye, there's no hey, looking forward to part two, because part two will be a continuation of this episode, and that's going to be therefore a continuation of the discussion around the F-111 or the F-111F specifically in Desert Storm. So we've gone from this being potentially a 2 to a 3-part episode. Anyway, apologies for the interruption. I know that was very quick and out of the blue, but come back and listen to what we're calling 1 Bravo, part 1B of this fascinating discussion with Greece. See you then.